across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
And good afternoon. Yeah, welcome back. It is the home of common sense. Thank you to Julia. She returns tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. We are going to delve back into that curious story. The Tories are calling it backdoor blasphemy laws creeping in. This is after the man you're now familiar with, burning the Quran, was convicted. Kemi Badenoch saying it set the country on the road to ruin, and the case should go to appeal. I do believe it is being appealed. We'll see how that pans out. Also this afternoon, police investigating the disappearance of Madeleine McCann are carrying out fresh searches in Portugal this week, 18 years after the 3-year-old went missing. We're live in Portugal to get the latest from the Sun reporter that is down there throughout the course of this latest part of a new investigation. And Britain is urging France to quickly fix a legal gap that stops police from stopping migrant boats in shallow water as frustrations grow over French inaction. I mean, good luck with that. They've had £500 million and Lord knows how many chances after God knows how many years. Details to come, everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk 0344 499 1000. It's complicated, as the old status used to suggest. Yeah, I mean, look, when you look at any rule, any law, you can fall down on black and white kind of plurality basis. You think this or you think that, there's no middle ground. Is there a middle? I don't know if there's a middle ground, but there's certainly ground for concern on the story of Hamit Kuskan, the 50-year-old who shouted abusive comments about Islam while setting fire to a book. I think it was live streamed as well. This is back in February when this happened. Well, he's been found guilty. Now, I don't think that bit would be a surprise. You tend not to just start mouthing it off in the street, setting fire to something in public and expect nothing to happen. If I stood there on a street corner telling every single person that walked past to off, at some point someone's going to smack me in the chops, and there's likely to be a public order issue around that. I might end up in front of the magistrate and the beak would give me a similar fine as this guy got, 240 quid with a surcharge of £96.72. Just added the 72, by the way. The district judge, John McGarver, said that his conduct was provocative and taunting. He told him, "You have a deep-seated hatred of Islam and its followers." The last time I looked, you are kind of allowed to have a deep-seated hatred of a religion or a faith. I think that's kind of all right. And in fact, I said this yesterday, I've said it for years, it should almost be taught in schools to mock religion if you want to. You should be told, at least, that of all the things that are mockable and reasonable to mock, have a pop at, lampoon, cartoon, satirise, give it a public lash, whatever you want to call it, then religion is absolutely right up there. I mean, if you are deeply religious, you might get a bit offended by that. But if your religion is so deeply held, then, well, you wouldn't get offended, would you? Because you know something the rest of us don't know. I mean, you're on the side of the big fella himself. You're on the side of God. Through whichever conduit you worship that God, you've got him on your side. So why would you care if somebody is mouthing it off about the doubts or issues around faith, of whatever faith it happens to be? So that group of people shouldn't be offended, because as far as they're concerned, it's God-given. They are on the right side. Everything's tickety-boo. They've ticked all the boxes. They have an ecclesiastical green light on which to work. Shouldn't matter to those people. To everybody else, of course, we are talking about people who believe they know the meaning of life. They know the meaning of life, how it started, who started it, what are the parables, the various other metaphors and examples and stories, what is real, what is allegoric, all of those things. They know this stuff, okay? That's how it works. Now, if you're not someone who is religious, then you should absolutely be able to say, this is bonkers. I mean, it's absolutely bonkers. I mean, it's so bonkers, I don't even know where to start. If you wanted to start a bonkers story and there was no religion, this is the one you would write. So this man built a boat and he got all the animals in the world, 2 of each one who happened to, by coincidence, be all around the same area. Really? What? Monkeys and fish? How did they do this? I don't know, but he did. Then there was a big flood and the boat floated away and they were all rescued because of God or something of that order. And each religion has these kind of nonsensical stories, and some will say, yep, that actually happened. Others will say, no, it's just a metaphor for something. It's all part of a lesson. It depends which version you read, which verse, chapter, Old Testament, New Testament, the Quran, the Torah, whatever book it happens to be. You should be able, come on, you should be able to have a pop at religion. Years ago, of course, if they thought you weren't religious and you were worshipping something else, the Witchfinder General or the likes would come around, hook you up and stick you into a ducking stool or something similar. There are parts of the world today, still today, backward medieval regimes where you could be stoned to death, set fire to, lobbed off a building if you don't adhere to someone's version of God. That is why, because of those archaic nonsensical rules, it's because of that you should have the right to have a pop at religion. You should be told that, yeah, there's things that are worth having a very cynical view of. And anyone trying to explain to you that they know the meaning of life and how it all started all those billions of years ago, who was around, who wasn't around, who spoke to who, how did they suddenly miraculously appear if it wasn't evil, blah, blah. Yeah, you should be told, yeah, write your school essay on that, on the nonsensical nature of those that follow a faith. That doesn't mean to say you have to hate the individual. So this fella, Turkish-born lad called Hamit Koskan, was probably a bit of a half-wit if he thought he was going to stand out in public, set fire to something, shout a load of stuff that might have caused a scrap. That is a public order offence. I don't think many people disagree with that point. There's a public order thing. Does it go again? I mean, free speech, public order, they're always a bit of a curious bedfellow, to be honest. Legally, there's going to be a line when you say, yeah, if you do stand on the street corner and tell people to off, every single person that walks past you, then there's a chance you're going to get a smack in the chops. And it's your fault, by the way, if you get a smack in the chops, not the other person's fault. They will also get nicked for doing it, but you started it. You started it because you were out there creating a public disorder. So that bit, I think we all sort of understand. The fact that he ended up in front of the beak is not particularly surprising, nor is it surprising that you might walk out with a guilty verdict and a fine. He hasn't gone to Crown Court. He's not been sent to jail in that respect. The bit that I think perturbs people is the fact that this was a religiously aggravated public order offence. I said only yesterday, it would kind of make more sense if this fella was nicked for littering, bearing in mind he set fire to something, and one would assume the remnants of that Quranic fire was there for all to see. You know, 50 quid for littering. I could kind of get that. The religiously aggravated public order offence is the problem here. And the judge said his hatred of Islam has stemmed from his experiences in Turkey and the experiences of your family. He said it is not possible to separate your views about the religion to your views about the followers. Is this a blasphemy law? I looked up the definition just to be doubly sure. Blasphemy, an act of cursing a god or irreverent behaviour towards anything held sacred. That seems to be what's going on here. Blasphemy, by the way, was abolished back in 2008. People say, well, if it was a Bible, if somebody did it to a Bible, he wouldn't have ended up here. There has been a case of somebody that was jailed for advocating the burning of all Bibles. So you think there wasn't, but there was. His name was Thomas Pooley. But it was in 1857. So that's as far back as we're going. Blasphemy laws went out the window back in 2008 under the Labour's criminal... what was the Criminal Justice Act? That was it, back in 2008. A humanist spokesman, because they backed this case, said the case does raise concerns and the bar for prosecutions is too low. They said when blasphemy laws were repealed in 2008, it was a victory for freedom of speech. We must make sure that public order legislation is not used to disproportionately target speech, even offensive speech, on religious matters. That's exactly the point I'm making. Therefore, chilling legitimate criticism and expression, they said. The judge, by the way, said he didn't view the case as an attempt to expand blasphemy laws, but has he done it, like it or not, by definition? Is this a backdoor blasphemy situation? 0344 499 1000. I'm delighted to have with us Dave Wooding in the studio. Dave, of course, journalist, commentator. He's been around the political block for, I did look it up, Dave, by the way, 18 decades. You've been covering the Westminster patch.
18 decades.
Beyond.
I'm only 24 as well.
It's only 24. That's unbelievable. How are you, Dave? Good to see you.
Very well. Good to see you, Joe. Good to see you.
Lots going on here, of course, particularly this free speech issue. It's worth having a little listen to a little clip here, because these are under this banner of warnings of blasphemy laws creeping back in after it happened. Let's have a little listen to the moment when this man carried out the act. Here it is.
What's this? Quran is burning. Why you burning the Quran? Quran, terrorist. Terrorist. Go from here. Islam religion of terrorists.
Now, this was a fellow that didn't like Islam, Dave. I think we can safely say that. He wasn't enamoured by the whole faith, the whole religion. He's Turkish-born. His own experiences informed him of that view. That's the one he has. I said at the beginning, you know, probably a half-wit, setting fire to something in public and shouting stuff out, you know, to think there'd be no reaction. But it's the religious bit that's upsetting people, and understandably so.
Yes, I mean, there's two things that strike me about this, Ian. One is, you mentioned before in your preamble that if it was the Bible, would the same person have been dealt with? Would the perpetrator have been dealt with in the same way? The difficulty with this is, I don't think if you burnt a Bible in public, anybody would react to it. I mean, the British people and the Christian people are not as intense about their own faith as many Muslim people are. Yep. So the reaction he made, was it blasphemy in that sense? Because it wasn't a blasphemy. What was it? Religiously aggravated public order offence. Yeah. So it's the old laws of incitement, behaviour likely to cause a breach of the peace, in another phrase. So he was likely to cause a breach of the peace by doing that, but would you be likely to cause a breach of the peace by burning a Bible? Probably not. True. But does that make it a two-tier justice system? That's the question.
Well, and it's the inclusion of the word religious in it, and that's the bit that's got everybody, you know, understandably, at the very least, you know, some people fuming and others just questioning. Well, we don't have a blasphemy law, as we said. New Labour abolished that in 2008. I mentioned the case of Thomas Pooley, who did go to jail for advocating burning Bibles, but it was in 1857. So yeah, it was a while back. Since then, we can find, I promise you, diligently, I've looked, I can't find any case of where somebody has been nabbed or nicked for doing anything to the Bible, but none that, or any other book for that matter. But the religious aspect of this, bearing in mind, we've got MPs at the moment, because there's all sorts of laws coming in about, you know, workplace regulations, what you can't say, etc., which in itself is a bit weird that they're kind of even debating this stuff. And you have got MPs standing up, advocating, saying we need a blasphemy law. We want a blasphemy law. We don't want certain religions to be criticised.
But it has to be a blasphemy law for all. If it would have to be, wouldn't it? And then you get into ridiculous situations where people take the Lord's name in vain. Is that blasphemy?
Well, indeed.
Where'd you start? I mean, what puzzles me about this case was that there was no outrage when he did it. Nothing happened on the scene. It was some third party who'd taken a video on their phone and sent it to the police. What are the police doing looking at that? Why didn't they just say, let it go?
Indeed.
It's created more publicity by reacting in this way. I think also it's creep. That's what people are talking about, legal creep. It's the foot in the door of a blasphemy rule.
100%.
And you know, where does it lead to now? Well, Nick Timothy, the Conservative MP, I hear, is going to produce a law next week or attempt to push a law through, which will protect free speech against any religious faiths in this way. I mean, it's fascinating that the police have done this, and you can see why people are getting outraged about it.
Indeed, and of course, you know, religion has been you know, satirised and lampooned. You think of the old Monty Python stuff, Life of Brian. I mean, that caused a heck of a scene at the time, didn't it?
Well, by the same token, that is an outrage.
Indeed, that should be an outrage. There was the Jerry Springer the musical. Do you remember that all?
Yes,
that, of course, had the religious movement up in arms that you shouldn't be able to say this. And I said at the beginning, Dave, well, look, you know, if you are wedded to, you know, ecclesiastically, spiritually, whatever, to a faith, then you should be quite relaxed about not. In fact, you should feel sorry for non-believers. You should feel sorry for people who lampoon it, not hate them, because you know the real story. And you know that, you know, you've got the word of God on your side. So why would you care if some half-wit decides to have a pop at your religion? Absolutely.
And the big problem we have here is it's coming back to bite us again. We don't have free speech written in any constitution in the way the Americans are. I mean, it won't be long before J.D. Vance is out again saying, look, there's another example of free speech in Britain, because we don't have this protection of free speech. All this, it's the same way that privacy laws have crept in by the back door without Parliament ever producing a privacy law. It's been made by the courts, and this is the first step. They do this today. What will they do tomorrow, and where will it end?
And we're going to speak to a lawyer. We're also going to speak to Andrew Doyle, the free speech advocate, in a moment as well. Stay with us, Dave. We're going to talk about the French crackdown on the shallow water migrant crossing. Good luck with that. Anyone who can convince the French to do anything. The search for Madeleine McCann. There's a new investigation. We'll be speaking later to the Sun journalist Rob Pattinson, who's gone down there to see exactly what is going on. Defence spending is on the list. Dave Wooding is with us. Delighted Dave's back with us in the studio. More coming up in just a couple of moments. Our lines are open: 0344 499 1000.
Well, there is an argument for that. The four top countries that receive the asylum seekers who are being run by these gangs from Afghanistan, Iran, and Iraq and Somalia actually are Italy, Germany, France, and the UK. And as you saw with the riots in Paris over the weekend, as a result of that, you're already seeing in Paris nearly 35% of Paris and 50% in certain of the areas that are controlled by people who are connected to the migrant crisis there. So they have a massive problem, and it's in their interest to shove it to Britain.
Absolutely.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is talk.
It is talk 22 minutes after 1 o'clock. Dave Wooding, the journalist, is with us in the studio, chewing the fat on the big stories of the day. And this, Britain is urging France to close a legal loophole blocking police from stopping migrant boats in shallow waters. Of course, this follows after the weekend, 1,195 migrants in one day. This was on Saturday, a record high this year. Let's have another reminder. We can never play this enough, because if you think our Prime Minister has not got a hold on this, think again. Our Keir knows what he's doing. Have a listen.
You will have helped to smash the gangs. Take those gangs down. But smashing the gangs. No shortcut. Smash the criminal gangs. No gimmicks. Have to smash those gangs. Just the hard graft of sleeves rolled up. Smash the gangs. Practical government. I think smashing the gangs is a deterrent. We will smash the gangs that undermine our security. Smash the gangs. Smash the people smuggling gangs.
Smash the gangs.
Never ever tire of that. Dave, well, that was the plan, to smash the gangs. It's not going very well, is it?
He's a smashing fella, isn't he?
He's a smashing. Really.
Sounds like he's doing an advertisement for dried potato powder.
It does, doesn't it? Remember that. He's had no success in smashing the gangs. Not that he could ever do this on his own anyway. I mean, that's a sort of an international organised crime issue that countries all over the planet, particularly Northern Europe, they've been on that anyway. He's got a problem here, hasn't he, Starmer? And pleading with the French, because they've got this rule that if these people are in the water, almost as if even if they've only just stepped into the water, you've got to let them go. You can't stop them.
Yes, I think the problem's been that the police have tried to stop the boats when they've been sailing. So what they're doing now is they're setting sail further down the coastline, then getting to Calais, and the people are running out in the water and boarding the boat. Yeah. So whatever anybody does, they found a way around it. This is the problem. I think people are sick and tired of talk. We heard stop the boats, and the boats still sail. We've heard smash the gangs, and the gangs still operate. Don't forget, like drugs gangs, as fast as you squeeze one gang out, another gang emerges somewhere.
That's the problem, isn't it? You know, big drug lords are quite relaxed about the odd bust every now and again, because they just regroup and set up again. So it's no big hassle.
And don't forget, of course, one of the reasons people are getting on board boats is because the last Conservative government were quite successful in stopping the other main route through, which was as stowaways in the back of lorries. They fitted to great fanfare. I remember covering the story. These big X-ray machines at Dover, so that every time a lorry came through, they go, way up, there's two bodies in the back of there. They'd open it out and get them out and send them back. Now, of course, that stopped them coming through that route. So that's why the boats have now come on. Of course, it's the victims of their own success.
But the number has increased massively.
Yes,
you're absolutely right, because we used to see those images of, I remember that was my patch as well down there, and you'd see almost halfway up the M20 somebody hanging off the back of a boat, or the tarpaulin would be torn because they'd snuck in at night. Every now and again a woman in Sittingbourne would discover a migrant in a Ford Fiat when she got home in the driveway. All of these stories. But now this is the method, but it's much bigger, it's much more organised, and of course we've given the French £500 million to try and I'm trying to work out what we get for our money.
It's not only bigger, more organised, and costing us more to try and combat. It's more visible. So people see it all. When they were coming in the backs of lorries, nobody saw these people.
Nobody really knew.
And the true figure was probably covered up. Whereas now we see them come in at Dover and you go, there's another 60 on that boat. And we know where it is. I mean, I don't know what the answer is. The big answer for me would be to make Britain less of a magnet, make the pull of Britain less attractive to them, and that's probably also by making some deterrence that if you come to Britain, you're going to be kicked out. And of course, the French have continuously refused to take back migrants who've come over this way.
Absolutely. But of course the problem we're up against here though, Dave, is that this is not in Labour's DNA, is it?
No.
Not really. If you look at the Rayners of this world, the David Lammies, even the Kears, they don't really believe this. So he can stand up there and sound as strict as he likes, but it's not on his political radar.
Don't forget, Keir Starmer did say, while in opposition, that some of the campaigns to stop the migrants coming over were racist. He really clearly did not believe in this. What spurred him into doing this is the rise of Reform UK. Because, I mean, like you say, I don't feel it's really beating in his heart is what he wants to do. He just knows he's got to do this because he'll lose the next election.
Yeah, spot on. Let's move to this story, Dave. Police have started a new search for Madeleine McCann's body in Portugal as of today. The Sun journalist Robert Pattinson had this to say, this was a few months ago, about the main suspect behind the girl's disappearance.
And I think we've always wondered, why do police suspect he is the man who kidnapped and murdered Madeleine McCann?
Yeah.
And we've been able to access police files which give us many of these answers.
Right.
So we can show pictures of him at key Maddie locations.
Yeah.
We can place him at the scene of an alleged confession. We've got stories where he describes his wish to abduct small children.
I mean, it's extraordinary, Dave, isn't it? I mean, nearly 20 years ago this happened, and for those that weren't around, it's almost hard to impart the nature of how high profile this was. It was global, it spawned conspiracy theories, there were court cases, there were libel actions, all manner of things. But of course, Madeleine McCann has never been found. Her parents, and I don't know whether they to this day still hold this view, but they always seem to say when they have been interviewed, they think she's still alive.
Yeah, whatever happens as the outcome of this, it's no win for the poor family, because either they learn that their daughter has been murdered and the body is found, or the mystery and the agony continues for years, God knows how long.
Indeed.
Further. But yes, I mean, a great job by the Sun and Channel 4 News, who teamed up together on this documentary, which I watched about a couple of months ago. I think it went on for an hour. There's a great moment in the middle of that where they went through some of the details of what was found in Christian Bruckner's lair. Some old photographs and videos, and they were a bit coy about saying precisely what it was, but I think this is linked in some way to what's going on now.
It does sound that way, doesn't it?
I think there's something that they've found there which suggests that there's some place worth searching, or that there may be something worth looking for. So I think there's a little bit more not hope, but a little bit more serious views about what they might find here.
Yeah, I mean, this particular person, Christian Bruckner, has got a horrendous CV of criminality in associated areas. So it's just interesting that his name first came up, a couple of years ago now, I suppose. But up to that point, there was never really any big firm, we think we're onto this. I mean, this is just, and look, the criminal world from the year dot is littered with unsolved mysteries, and you think Jack the Ripper, goodness me, all sorts of people that were never caught for horrendous crimes, and maybe this just sits in that category, potentially though, until now.
Yes, and there was some concerns among a certain group in the population that the Scotland Yard and British taxpayers shouldn't be spending money looking for Madeleine after so many years. What's happening now, though, is this is an international search. This is not Britain funding this. The Germans are funding this, and it's an Interpol issue now. So that it really is being taken seriously. And of course, he's due to be out of prison shortly. So there's an added race against time element to this, to try and nail him on this one, if that of course he possessed his innocence, but we'll see. Just
a final one. This is a headline called "The Bridge to Nowhere." It's been ridiculed. A £50 million bridge over there in Lincolnshire. They love a bit of building in Lincoln. I know it's a fairly flat county, but they love a bridge in Lincolnshire. So they thought, well, let's build a bridge then. Here's 50 million quid. What could go wrong? Well, they didn't finish it. So there's no connecting road. This is the Spalding Western Relief Road. Was intended to ease congestion on the A16, but remains unfinished. So you've essentially got this aerial image, if you look down on it, of a bridge, well, literally going nowhere. They need 30 million more quid.
Well, I mean, did they not think of what they're going to put on the end of this bridge when they built it? I mean, why start a job which you can't finish? I mean, talk about spoiling the ship for a ha'porth of tar. Well, of course, it'll cost them another, what, £33 million for that road, I think?
Yeah, to finish it off.
Yeah, it's a bridge too far for them, I guess.
It's a 4-mile project, began in 2022, now delayed to at least 2030, 28 million diverted from other road schemes, just to try and get this thing, finished.
Well, total incompetence.
Yeah, it's not like that. I've always said this, and you'll know this as a journalist. Some of the greatest stories are actually buried in local government, aren't they? There's some absolutely... I know Private Eye have always done their rotten boroughs, piece. But that kind of area, this sort of story, which probably before social media, we might not have even heard about some of these absolute outrageous wastes of money, but they're all over the place.
Well, I used to do loads of these when I was on local papers, only on a local paper for a few years, but some of the stories you get there. But now the problem is the demise of local media means there's nobody covering these local councils or the local courts for that matter. So lots of things are going unreported, which is a big problem, because again, we talked about free speech earlier. Free speech, open society, the judicial system being covered thoroughly, and also the what's going on in our rotten boroughs, as you call them.
Absolutely right. Nothing makes the, even in my neck of the woods, which is we live just sort of around the corner from each other, just by coincidence. And I keep looking around for news. I did find a fella in the road with a cut head quite recently, and I stopped the car. He was laid in the road, and I thought, journalistically, I thought there's a story here, but I better help the man with the cut head first. And I picked it. This is true. I picked him up, put him in the car. I said, "Where do you want to go?" He said, "I want to go home. I'm half cut, mate." There was nothing wrong with him at all. He just fell over because he was drunk. That's the biggest thing that's happened in Sevenoaks since those trees blew down. Back in the hurricane.
Well, if he'd been the Lord Mayor of Sevenoaks, then maybe you've had a story.
There would have been a story there indeed. Listen, Dave, good to see you again.
And you, Ian.
Dave Wooding with us here on the programme. He'll be back soon. 0344 499 1000. Over to you. Is this backdoor blasphemy, as the question goes? Reference the story of the man being found guilty for a public order, a religiously aggravated public order offence, and it's that word religiously that is troubling, understandably. We will talk to Chris Daw, KC, in a few moments, plus Andrew Doyle, the free speech advocate and broadcaster and author, is with us as well. And over to you as well. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk, just gone 1:30.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is 25 to 2 on Talk. Let's pick up on that story then. So the Tories are warning of a creeping blasphemy law. This is after the man that we've been discussing, Hamit Kuskan, was fined for burning a Quran outside the Turkish consulate in London. He shouted anti-Islamic slurs and was convicted of a public order offence. Kemi Badenoch says it's putting Britain on the road to ruin. Robert Jenrick calling it two-tier justice. In a moment, Chris Daw, KC, barrister, writer and broadcaster, can shine some light on the legalities of all of this. But first, Andrew Doyle, author of The End of Woke, and regularly speaks out on these kind of issues as well. Andrew, good afternoon to you. So blasphemy by the back door, the Tories are calling it, are they right?
They're exactly right. I mean, let's not forget that this guy, Hamit Kuskan, He's a guy who was raised in Turkey. His mother's family were killed during the Armenian genocide. He has a lot of reasons to dislike Islam as a belief system, and he's every right to express that view. And of course, in a free society, no belief system can possibly be ring-fenced from criticism, ridicule, and even hatred. If you hate a belief system, you should be allowed to say it. That's what it means to be free. Now, you might say that burning a copy of the Quran is needlessly provocative. It's not something I would do. It's not something I even approve of. I don't like the image of burning books. It leaves a very bad taste in my mouth. That form of protest I don't like. However, it is a form of peaceful protest. He wasn't harming anyone. He was disposing of a copy of his own book that he had bought in the way that he deemed to be fit. And he did it in front of the Turkish consulate because, as he said explicitly, he wanted to protest Erdogan's government in Turkey, which he perceives to be an Islamist regime, which is laying the groundwork for further Islamist regimes. I mean, that's what he said explicitly.
Yeah.
Well, the judge said in the ruling that the part of his decision was based on the fact that he'd chosen that location. Now, he interpreted that as therefore being deliberately designed to upset Muslims who he knew would be there. But on the contrary, where else would you want to protest against the Turkish government than outside the Turkish consulate? Seems to me that that's the ideal place to stage a peaceful protest. But the most disturbing element of this, I think, is the fact that this man was attacked by a knife-wielding maniac who stabbed him. And then as he was on the floor, he was kicked by a passing delivery driver. Yeah. Those two individuals have not yet faced trial. I know they will do. But as yet, this one's been very much rushed through. Apparently the words are the more frightening thing. But even worse than that, the judge in this case said, we know that your protest was disorderly and likely to stir disordered behavior because you were attacked twice. So in other words, the attacks are taken as proof that this was stirring up violence. That to me is insane.
Yeah, and I kind of vaguely, I said yesterday, I mean, I can understand if he was done for littering, to be honest, because no one would assume there was a bit of debris after you set fire to something. And if you got a 50 quid fine from the local council for not clearing it up, I could almost get my head around that. I can just about get my head around, public disorder and all of that stuff. But the inclusion of the word religiously is the disturbing bit for me, Andrew. The fact that this has clearly been surrounded by that element and has become the centerpiece of this, that it's a religious crime. And there's you can't dress that up in any other way.
No, the key distinguishing feature in the judge's ruling that he was distinguishing between whether Koskan was motivated by hatred towards Islam, which the judge conceded was perfectly legal, or whether it was motivated towards animosity towards Muslims themselves, the people who follow Islam. Now, the defendant made clear that he had no problem with individual Muslims, that he was talking about the faith, the belief system, and ultimately the judge didn't believe him. So that's really the sticking point. But the point is that this charge, this whole thing has been brought about because of the desecration of a holy book. I mean, let's not forget, we saw Tahir Ali stand up in Parliament and say that he wanted to see this kind of act, desecration of holy books, criminalised. He was calling for a blasphemy law in Parliament. That's a member of Parliament calling for that law. And let's not also forget that when the Crown Prosecution Service initially issued this charge, they actually wanted to charge him with intent to cause harassment, alarm or distress against the religious institution of Islam. Yeah. That's the words that the Crown Prosecution Service put in their charge. They were forced to reword it because there is no law that does. In other words, the Crown Prosecution Service were effectively inventing a blasphemy law. Yeah, that would have been unequivocally a blasphemy law, wouldn't it? Well, the judge rejected that, and it was rejected, and that to me, but that points to the real problem here, and the real problem here is institutional capture. We have the police services, the Crown Prosecution Service, and even elements of the judiciary are captured by this intersectional, multicultural ideology. And so therefore, one of the things that activists do when they're in positions of power is they work around the law. OK, we've seen it with Stonewall. Stonewall have been misrepresenting the equality law for years, the Equality Act, which is why we had to have this ruling in the Supreme Court. Yeah. Activists misrepresent the law. The Crown Prosecution Service here seemingly invented a kind of law. Well, we've had it many, many times before, actually. This is not the first time this has happened. Remember that when Keir Starmer was Director of Public Prosecutions, he had the wording changed so that the Crown Prosecution Service no longer talks about complainants, but talks about victims. That's a very significant linguistic shift, because it means that we're now talking about bypassing due process, the assumption of guilt. Any of these kind of activist maneuvers within these major and significant bodies pose a genuine threat. I mean, another example, after the Jimmy Savile scandal, the Crown Prosecution Service was absolutely determined to make sure we had as many convictions as possible when it came to sexual offence charges. Pressure, unofficial pressure maybe, but pressure was put upon the police and the prosecutors to do so. So much so that in 2018 it was revealed that in over 40 cases, police and prosecutors had withheld evidence that would have exonerated individuals accused of sexual assault because they wanted to ramp up the number of prosecutions. In other words, they knew that these men were innocent. We're talking about over 40 lives would have been ruined. They knew they were innocent, and they prioritized the ideological goal of the CPS over justice. So it's a very serious thing, this. When activists take control in this way, we don't have a blasphemy law in this country. We haven't had one since 2008. But it looks very much as though the activists within the system are determined to reinstate it one way or another. If Parliament won't do it, then they sure as hell will find a way.
Do you think, Andrew, that this is... Because obviously, if you look online, and, you know, it's advisable for none of us to live our life through the conduit of social media, but, you know, we look every now and again, whether it's sitting on a train, laying in bed, and you know, depending on what somebody's said, if you disagree with it, you get very angry, and then, of course, we've all started to write a response and then deleted it when we thought better. But I wonder... There is a theory, you know, that this is a kind of an organised setup. Everything you've just described it's a framework that has been almost beautiful. You could draw the kind of the equivalent of the family tree and link it all up, from the Attorney General, the Prime Minister, the law courts here, the magistrates. Somebody had a secret word. Obviously, it didn't come down directly from Keir, but it came from all of these theories. And I don't think that is the case. I mean, I think that would be the stuff of, you know, sort of crazy, Netflix-y kind of dramas. However, you are sort of... It's a bit like quoting Orwell, isn't it? You don't want to do it, but sometimes you're sort of forced into going, oh, I had to do it in the end. And because it does look like that. And I just wonder whether there's a sort of a nudge theory going on where people don't even realise they're part of it, that they just go down that path and agree or err on the side of a certain ruling because they think it's the thing to do.
It looks very much like that, but I would really urge people not to go down these conspiratorial routes. I mean, you're going back to this idea of the long march through the institutions, which it was an idea that was put to paper. You know, it's not something that was invented. People thought that, you know, we could gradually infiltrate the major institutions, the major establishments, and seize power. But it didn't really happen like that. I mean, it's a combination of many things, but really a lot of it's to do with fashion, and a lot of it's to do with changing trends, and that there is now among the elites, the more powerful in society, a tendency to fall into line with these ideological views for all sorts of reasons. It's not that they're all gathered in secret saying, how can we destroy free speech in this country? Let's implement this, let's implement that. It's just that those in positions of power tend to be the kind of people who fall in lockstep with this activist worldview. And you know, this goes right back to, obviously, there were problems within the police with the McPherson report when you go back to the horrible murder of Stephen Lawrence, and people wanted to do something, but nothing quite happened. It took many years before the College of Policing introduced their idea of non-crime hate incidents and the idea of recording racist incidents rather than racist crimes. And so it's been a gradual development. But, you know, College of Policing is a very good example. They introduced non-crime hate incidents in 2015, but they didn't have a government mandate to do so. No. And that was many, many years after Stephen Lawrence. This was nothing to do with that. They just did it. And the guy who was running the College of Policing at the time had just won the year before Stonewall's top award. Now, I'm not saying causality is present there, but what I'm saying is there's an activist mindset.
Yes, it's in the Venn diagram, isn't it?
At the upper echelons, right? So I think what we have to do, and it's very hard because, you know, it's all very well for the Tories now to say this is a backdoor blasphemy law. They've done nothing to stop it, though.
100%.
I mean, they were in power for 14 years. Why do we have, at the moment, we have hate speech laws in this country, which should never exist. We have laws on our statute books, codified in the Communications Act and the Public Order Act and the Malicious Communications Act.
Yep.
which effectively mean that you can be sent down for offensive words. I mean, we have thousands and thousands of people arrested every year in this country for offensive speech. The Communications Act stipulates that if you post something online that is grossly offensive, that's the words, grossly offensive, you can be arrested for that and you can be prosecuted. What does that even mean? No one can define it. Someone in Parliament, the government of one form or another, has to say, we can't have nebulous terms like grossly offensive on the statute books. They have to be scrapped. They also have to go back to the quangos like the College of Policing. They have to go back to the Crown Prosecution Service. They have to strip out activist influence in the judiciary. It's not an easy thing. And it's going to take a long time because it took a long time to embed itself in there. But it has to be done if we want to be living in a free society.
Listen, Andrew, it's always great to speak with you on these issues. Andrew Doyle, author of The End of Woke, by the way. I fear he might be writing a few volumes of that. Great to have Andrew on with us. Let's go to a word on the legal side of this. Chris Dorr, KC, barrister, writer and broadcaster. Afternoon to you, Chris. So the Tories are calling it blasphemy by the back door. Do you recognise that?
Yes, I do. I mean, the reason we abolished blasphemy a few years back, as you've just heard, is because it only applied to the Christian faith and the established faith and only protected one religion. So understandably, there was a sensible decision taken that in a country that has many religions, you can't have a blasphemy law for one, but not for the others. So it was abolished altogether. And the problem we have, and I agree with almost everything that your last contributor, Andrew Doyle, had to say, the problem we have is that we have too many criminal laws that criminalise behaviour, which is fundamentally not suitable for the criminal justice process, like causing someone's offence or causing someone distress because, you know, they're distressed because you strongly disagree with them and they find that very upsetting. Well, you know, fundamentally, it should be first and foremost, you have the right to say whatever you like, provided you do it peacefully and you protest peacefully. And you should be able to do it and say it wherever you like, including outside the embassy of a foreign government, which may not like it and may crack down on its own citizens who protest in their own country. But in this country, you should be allowed to burn the Quran, you should be able to burn Lord of the Rings or any other book you want that you've bought and paid for, and no police officer should be able to stop you.
Yeah. What's the bit that got me here? I mean, if somebody wants to say, I said to Andrew, you know, it's more of a littering offence than anything as far as I can see it. But nonetheless, I was being slightly sort of smart saying that. But my point is that the public disorder aspect of this, aggravated public order offence, all right, let's say, OK, he was kicking off. He was clearly wanting to make a scene. Somebody gave him a smack and, you know, that proves the point that it was public disorder. But what's the inclusion of the religiously element going on here, Chris? Why do you sense that, and Andrew Doyle did say that this was downgraded, you know, from what it originally could have been, but why do we need that included?
Well, I don't think we do. The reason it's included, I think it's important for people to understand that the judge in this case was applying the law of the land, which was decided by Parliament. It's not the judge's fault. There's nothing woke about the judge. The judge has simply applied the law of the land very, very strictly and accurately. What the problem is, the law's wrong. But the answer to your question is that some years ago, someone had the bright idea to use the words racially and religiously aggravated and use them as to create sort of separate crimes in numerous different categories, of which the Public Order Act is the most obvious. So, you know, we've always had, well, for many, many years, we've had a Public Order Act. It goes back to 1986, and it criminalised, the idea of it was to criminalise situations where there's a sense of fear and violence created by people behaving in a way that it isn't acceptable, and which genuinely puts the public in some sort of fear, and genuine and real substantial fear. Now it's being used simply to attack people, arrest people for posting on Twitter in a way that people find offensive. And you know, once you head down that road there's not going to be many police left to investigate burglary or robbery or rape, because they're just going to be too tied up on Twitter all day.
Yeah, thousands of them, as it turns out. Chris, thank you as ever. Very thorough stuff from Chris Dorr, KC, barrister. Is there anyone that thinks all of this stuff is kind of OK? Is it blasphemy by the back door? Although, as Chris was saying there, you know, the judge simply implemented, or the district judge in this case, implemented the law of the land. It was almost that simple. Thoughts from you, 0344 499 1000.
Well, it's not getting any better, is it? You know, they haven't listened to any of the unions. They haven't listened to any of the protests we've had, and it's all been peaceful. It's all been sensible, and it's all trying to start a discussion with these people. We're seeing job losses already, you know, in some of these tractor companies. Now, you know, if you're going to tax an industry like this, people are going to slow down on spending, slow down on investing, and
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
B says, well, it must be blasphemy related due to the amount of times the judge mentioned religion. Well, yeah, he said, this is Judge John McGarver, he said his conduct was provocative and taunting, and told him he has a deep-seated hatred of Islam and its followers. Now, can somebody explain what is wrong with that? Why you're not allowed to have a deep-seated hatred of certain people of whatever faith it happens to be? I mean, surely, if you fundamentally believe that a faith is not just inaccurate and doesn't stand the sniff test in any factual sense, but you also believe there are dangers within it, sort of indoctrination, the hypnotic nature, the cult-like nature of religion as well. Why are you not allowed to have a deep-seated hatred of it and its followers? I think if you lived in some countries that are run very strictly on along religious lines, you would absolutely feel. And then you came back home and you go, oh my God, I've just lived under that line. Imagine living under the Taliban. And then coming back, you go, yep, that is absolutely a faith I want nothing to do with. And I know people say, well, that's just one version. It doesn't matter. The point is, that's your assessment of it. Why are you not allowed to have that assessment of it? Adam is in Nottingham. On this point of blasphemy, Adam, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, yes. My thoughts on religion is... I think most people I talk to, which is, you know, I have beliefs, but none of them are based in you know, religious books that are just based on Chinese whispers, effectively. Yeah. But yeah, it's just, I believe in energy and the continuation of energy. That's what I believe in, but in whatever shape or form. But what I believed in for long years, before all this even happened, is I don't understand why religion is so promoted anyway. I don't believe it should be in our schools or in our government or on our streets or knocking on our door. If you want to believe something brilliant, keep it in your church, keep it in your home. You know, as for this poor guy who's just obviously had a lot of stuff go off in his life, being beaten up in the street and then told it's his fault is ridiculous. If I beat someone up in the street, you know, whatever opinion I have, I might be glad I've done it because the person was a bad person, but I'll be expecting to go to jail.
If you stood on a street, this is the example that I gave earlier because somebody gave it to me earlier, that if you were to tell every person that walked past you to F off, every single one of them, you know, a pretty, you know, vitriolic F off, if you were to do that and somebody smacked you in the face, is that your fault or their fault?
Well, that's my fault and their fault. That's my fault for being an idiot, and that's their fault for exacting violence on someone for no reason than just spouting words. So there is that there. But you know, as I believe with all religion or anything like that, it simply comes down to a case of believe what I believe or I'll hurt you.
Yeah.
However,
well, that's where people are at. You know, we saw it with the Batley school teacher, who's now still in hiding, with people outside the school saying this man he should be in jail. People say
ridiculous in this country. Ridiculous. Look, all of this, the government bowing to this, or police even bowing to this. What they're doing is they're bowing to terrorism. Yeah. You are bowing to terrorism. You are allowing these people to say
it's a mob mentality.
Religion, Yes, it's ridiculous.
You know, we had it with the school kid that scuffed the Quran that time, you know, and they almost assembled a Sharia court with a senior police officer, a counsellor, I think the teacher was there, the mother was there, you had the imam was there, all suggesting, you know, we're not going to forget this, we've got, you know, we're going to keep our eye on this, and everyone nodding along on the panel going, yeah, and the mother calling for peace because she didn't want her kid to be, you know, somehow attacked or beheaded, for God's sake. I'm thinking, well, this is in the UK.
I only see that as one thing, and that's terrorism.
Yeah, 100%.
That's the only way you can see it. I'm going to use terror to make you shut your mouth and not say anything bad. Otherwise, I'm coming after not only you, I'm coming after your family.
It makes you wish for the days when, you know, people protested against Jerry Springer the Opera, a few old grannies with their knitting and a little placard that said, please stop this show. You know, that seemed rather measured in comparison to what some of those monsters outside that school were calling for a teacher who did something they just happened to disagree with in the United Kingdom. Adam, thank you very much indeed for that. Professor Leo says, I think you'll find that all religion is basically an attempt to explain what is unknown by what is even more unknown. No one has the answer to life or why we are here, simply because that is not the ultimate conundrum. Anyone who tells you different is a deceiver and a hypocrite, or possibly just mad. Yeah, don't let anybody tell you it's not a form of madness, right? I mean, come on. It's a choice to indoctrinate yourself into something, whatever that happens to be, whether it's a religion, whether it's a cult, whatever. And the similarities there are there for all to see. Is it blasphemy laws by the back door? 0344 499 1000. Let's get the news headlines at 2.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Yeah, welcome back. 3 minutes after 2 o'clock. It is the home of common sense. So, as you've been hearing, the Conservatives are warning of backdoor blasphemy laws creeping in. This is after the man we've been discussing, Hamid Koskan, was convicted of burning the Quran. Kemi Badenoch saying it sets the country on the road to ruin and the case should go to appeal. I mean, the Tories can't really open their mouths on this, can they? But let's give them, for the benefit of this debate, let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Is this backdoor blasphemy going on here? Also this afternoon, Britain is urging France to quickly fix a legal gap that stops police from stopping migrant boats in shallow water. I'd love to know what their assessment is of shallow water. Is that when you just put your feet in the water? It probably is. Frustration is growing, of course, over French inaction over this. They have been not just woeful, but it's absolutely pathetic. And bearing in mind, we're paying £500 million for the privilege. And NATO is set to push Britain to raise defence spending to 3.5% of GDP by 2035 as part of efforts to rearm and reassure Donald Trump. We'll have more on that story as well. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk 0344 499 1000. Gillian Lincoln says, just heard a funny thing on the bus, an old couple talking about Starmer. One said, I understand he was named after Keir Hardie. The other man said more like Oliver Hardy, like it. And I don't think the first to make that, thank you, Jill, to make that observation. You can understand why. Joanna in Salisbury says, on the blasphemy ruling, does this now mean a woman with a short skirt is inciting violence or rape? Great comparison, because that's the sort of territory we're in on this. And Brad in Cambridge, reference Migrant, says, can you help with something I genuinely don't understand? We're repeatedly told when a boat of migrants sets foot on British soil and claims refugee status, it isn't illegal. But if that same migrant comes over hidden in the back of a camper van, I would be prosecuted for aiding illegal entry. Why aren't the RNLI prosecuted? I don't know what happens there, because if somebody pops out of your Ford Fiesta and says, hi, I'm here to claim asylum, what is the status of you as the alleged facilitator of the crime, which is what happens? You can be fined thousands for this. It often gets waived, but only usually after a newspaper has got involved and told the story. It's a cracking point, Brad. I don't know what the legality would be of that. So the migrant becomes legal, but the driver of the car that brought the migrant over without even knowing they were in the boot remains to cough up with a £5,000 fine or whatever the heck it happens to be. Let's get a word on the big political stories of the day. Isabel Oakeshott, Talk's international editor, is back with us. Isabel, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon. I mean, so often the law seems to work in completely perverse ways, doesn't it? You know, giving the victims the worst possible time of it and allowing those that are actually behind bad behaviour to get away from it. It's bizarre.
I thought that was a great point that Brad just raised there about what happens if somebody pops out the boot of your car and suddenly they claim, you know, asylum status. That makes them not illegal. But the person who drove the car collars a £5,000 fine.
Yeah, I mean, we know this happens because there was a case of it fairly recently, wasn't there? I thought it was absolutely outrageous. I seem to recall it was a couple. They were completely unaware of what had happened. I don't know whether they must have been in a larger vehicle. I mean, if someone was jumping into the boot of my quite old car, I'd be pretty aware of it, actually. I mean, half the time the boot's really hard to open because it's all seized up. But presumably they were in a larger vehicle and they ended up getting in trouble for it. And you're just like, what?
How could that? I think the migrant even spoke out in their defence. You know, that's how mad the whole thing was, because they made him a nice cup of tea on their driveway. I mean, goodness me. Well, let's talk about strange, bizarre, unfathomable elements of life. The Quran burner, as he will now be known, Mr. Koskan, fined £336 for shouting anti-Islamic slogans, setting fire to the Quran. Look, he did something that was seen as public disorder. I can just about get my head around the fact that somebody might say, mate, you know, you're going to cause a scene if you do this. But it's the inclusion of this word religious public disorder that I think is troubling everybody, Isabel.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like what he did. I'm not in favour of Quran burning of any description. And I've been sort of thinking to myself, you know, if someone stood outside a church, if a Muslim stood outside a church and burnt a Bible, would I want them to be, as a Christian, would I want them to be prosecuted? And the answer is absolutely not. I think to myself, this person either has some mental health problems or they're trying to make a political point. Either way, they're a wally. If they particularly want to go around holding a piece of fire, they're probably going to get their fingers burnt and, you know, just in the physical way, not bothering with the law. I just don't think the law needs to get involved in all of this. There are plenty of ways in which the law in the UK should be getting more involved, as in making itself heavily applied in petty crimes that aren't at all. I mean, I'm in the Middle East today. I was walking along the street where I live, and I was surprised to see there was a mobile phone on a park bench. And it was just there. It was a new mobile phone, and someone had just put it there while they went to do something else, and no one was touching it. You know, how nice is it to be in a society where, you know, people do have that level of respect for the law, that they don't just pettily pinch things in an opportunistic way. But I don't want to see a Britain in which people have find themselves being prosecuted for silly acts like that. You know, the courts have far greater problems to deal with. They're endlessly going on about how stretched they are. Let's concentrate on the really important stuff.
Absolutely. But of course, we live in a world where there are laws going through Parliament that could, you know, make this stuff even worse. You know, what you say on social media. We've got MPs in, you know, not secretly, not in some kind of unnamed written question, but standing up, showing their face, literally asking the Prime Minister to, you know, does he support the idea of a law to protect a certain religion? And the Prime Minister can't even unequivocally say, no, that's nonsense. We got rid of that in 2008. But, you know, it's almost tacitly kind of agreeing with it.
Yeah, I mean, but that's classic Starmer, isn't it? You know, he's just so terrified of offending, in quotes, a certain sector of the electorate. I think we all know what it is he's afraid of, and you know, his own candidates have lost out to some of the more vocal members of that community on certain issues like this. So Labour is extremely sensitive on it. I really do worry about the creep of this stuff. I think it's appalling. And as you say, it's not just this, it's freedom of speech, which is much more dear to my heart. And, you know, we can all continue to talk about Lucy Connolly, who is still in prison.
Yeah. There it is. A profound point. Listen, the French are going to do us a favour, Isabel. There's some good news of the day. They're no longer going to dilly-dally around and whatever the heck they're not doing over there on the Calais coast and associated areas. They're going to swiftly almost jump into action, jump in the water to action, because, of course, ministers are urging them to swiftly close this loophole, stopping them from intercepting migrant boats in shallow French waters. At the moment, they don't do that. I don't know what constitutes shallow water in their eyes. I'd imagine a couple of inches probably does it. But the Brits are going to get very annoyed, hoping the French will go, yeah, we are very, very sorry. We will change this and we will start intercepting boats. I mean, don't hold your breath on this one, right?
I mean, the French, I've written in today's Telegraph about the behaviour of the French. You know, the last thing Keir Starmer wants is a big diplomatic row with the French. He spent the last month just sort of prostrating himself to Brussels, hasn't he, as part of our big reset with the EU. But the reality is, and he needs to face facts here, the French are perilously close, not to being our friends in this campaign against the flow of illegal migrants across the Channel. The French are perilously close to becoming the enemy. They are doing precious little proactively to stop the flow of migrants. And, you know, you only have to look at the footage taken by people who've actually been out there to look at what's going on. You know, you see French police cars just driving past vessels, dinghies that are being readied for departure. They don't even have any people smugglers around them or passengers. The French could easily be puncturing those vessels. No one would be harmed. The vessels would be rendered useless. They don't do that. The French haven't even erected a few barriers around the pinch points. They could easily be doing that. Remember, they've got £500 million of British taxpayers' money, and they're, as far as I can see, doing pretty much diddly squat with it.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? No one's ever really been able to explain this sort of acceleration of cash we send over there. I remember Rishi Sunak having that press conference with Macron. He even talked about sort of reception centres or processing centres on French soil Do you know, that was never mentioned again, I don't think.
Well, I can update you on that, actually, because you're right. I was looking into this yesterday. So Sunak announced, as part of this £500 million deal of British taxpayers' money, the French were going to be using some of that to build a new detention centre. That was in 2023. I thought to myself, what's happened to that detention centre? Has it ever materialised? But oh no, it's not materialised. It was only due to be finished in any case at the end of 2026. But apparently it's mired in planning laws, which means that it probably won't be finished by the time Keir Starmer is still prime. By the time it's finished, Keir Starmer will probably be out of office, quite possibly driven out as a result of public fury over the small boat crossings.
100%. It's quite timely that you literally looked into something. It just rattled in my head quite a lot, that one. You know, I was expecting, if I go on one of those day trips to Calais, you know, to get me cheap cigarettes, if I do that, then, you know, I might spot it in the distance and go, oh, there's the processing centre. But apparently...
much more likely to be spotting lots and lots of migrants heading our way.
Yeah, it probably comes under any other business once every 6 months in the Calais Chamber of Commerce or whatever the heck they do over there. Let's move to NATO. I mean, it's a story that doesn't always kind of grip people as they kick their quilt off the bed in the morning, but it's very important nonetheless. Defence spending. NATO urging Britain to spend 3.5%. Of course, Donald Trump had said that European countries should be spending about 5%, getting more in line with what the Americans and the like do. Labour, of course, have said, well, they'll pop it up a little bit, committing to 3%, but it's not going to be anywhere near enough. I don't know, is there a magic answer to this one, Isabel?
Well, the magic answer is that we get the economy growing so that actually a percentage of GDP becomes an awful lot more money. If the economy is flatlining or going into recession, then you can put the percentage up that you're going to contribute to defence and you're still not going to get any more for your money. And in fact, we were talking about this yesterday on one of the other talk shows, and I was just pointing out about defence procurement inflation. So when the top brass decide they need, you know, a number of new submarines, or they need a shiny new this or a shiny new that, it's usually purchased at a particular price. But as time goes on, I'm afraid that procurement goes shooting up at about 10 or 11% a year, which is way in excess of inflation. So that quickly swallows up the increases that might be planned by this government, who are no longer committing to increasing to a particular percentage. They're now saying it's just an ambition by the end of the next government, by the end of the next parliament. I'm thinking, yeah, probably not going to be around at this rate. How important is it to you? Again, I said that this doesn't really land, to coin that horrible phrase, with most people, and I'd include myself in that. It's not, you know, when I think about what we're putting on the show, we tend not to think, let's do a big debate on defence spending, because it's a fairly sort of parochial area of life, and we know it's important, and we hope that there are some impressive people with some big brains that are sorting this out for us. But it's only when you stop and take a step back and you realise what we once were, what we once had, is no longer there, and you look across and see what's going on with Russia and goodness knows where else, China even for that matter, you start to think, wow, we'd be absolutely knackered if something kicked off. Absolutely, and I understand why people don't find this very exciting. I think a lot of it is down to the way it's reported. People assume far too much knowledge about defence, and it can be made to sound very boring. Let me just put it really simply. Right now, under the laws of the sea, you can take a boat from the UK and sail anywhere you like in the world. You've got that freedom of navigation. That's the rules, and you could find your way to the other side of the globe if you've got a good enough boat and a good enough navigation. Yeah. And the whole of international trade basically works on that foundation. And so many of the goods that we rely on, whether it's a sofa you've ordered, which is being shipped from, I don't know, the Middle East, Turkey, whatever, a lot of our stuff is coming in based on freedom of navigation. And what is really under threat, among many other things, whether it's territory grabbing from Putin or whatever, is that freedom to navigate around the world. So for our goods to get to us without being interrupted by hostile actors. So for that reason, it's just an example. We actually do need a decent navy unless we're going to rely on other countries to allow us to be able to get our ships where they want to go.
Spot on that point, Isabel. Thank you, as ever. That's Isabel Oakeshott, Talks International editor, with us on the programme. How's all your Amazon stuff going to arrive? If you didn't have the free right of passage, which is a fair point. Rachel says, I'm a devout Christian and have been since 2020. I hope J.D. Vance intervenes regarding the recent case. If someone is secure in their faith as I am and someone wants to burn a Bible, then let them. The justice system should stay out of religion completely, says Rachel. And that's a really good point. By the way, I should say, I do have an envy of people who have a devout faith, and Rachel would be a great example. I always feel that I don't think people are mad because they follow a faith. I can't always fathom it. I can't always feel that every element that I hear about it is believable to me. But when I meet sensible people who are very religious and regular churchgoers, or whatever religion it happens to be, there is a bit of me that thinks, wow, they know something I don't know. They've got something I don't. They've got a kind of guiding spiritual light that I simply don't possess, and that must be great to have that. And I'm sure it's both a comfort, it's a roadmap, it kind of settles lots of other beliefs in your life because you can bring it under the banner of God. You can look at the unfathomable nature of religion all day long. You know, if there's a God, why is there starvation? Blah, blah, blah. You can go on to that. But so someone who's able to sort of circumnavigate all of what I would say seems to be overwhelming evidence that at the very least the jury is out. Someone who can do that, full respect, which is why I love Rachel's message there. Because similarly, Rachel recognises the other side as well, that if you want to, you know, you should be able to have the freedom to express. I would like to think that God or Jesus or Muhammad or anyone else for that matter would absolutely say, you know, my children, of course you can go out there and doubt me and question me. I mean, I'm trying to remember my biblical kind of bits and pieces from school. I'm sure there were moments when Jesus took on the non-believers. I mean, the Bible must be full of that, surely. At least religious studies would be full of that. So yeah, the idea that courts are getting involved, the more you talk about this, the more you realise how stupid but also disturbing it is. You are guilty of a religiously aggravated crime. Wow, what is this, 1650 for God's sake? What are the witch-finder generals coming back? 0344 499 1000. Is this a backdoor blasphemy law that we're seeing here and saw at Westminster Magistrates Court yesterday? Our lines are open, 2:20. This is Talk.
Well, it's not getting any better, is it? You know, they haven't listened to any of the unions. They haven't listened to any of the protests we've had, and it's all been peaceful. It's all been sensible, and it's all trying to start a discussion with these people. We're seeing job losses already, you know, in some of these tractor companies. Now, you know, if you're going to tax an industry like this, people are going to slow down on spending, slow down on investing, and
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Sarah in West Sussex says, Ian, Blasphemy, what grinds my gears is the fact that under Equality Act, British Jews are a race. Anti-Semitism is racism, and yet week after week since 7/10, pro-Palestinian protesters have waved placards daubed with anti-Semitic slogans, chanted anti-Semitic slogans and incited violence against Jews. Racism is a criminal offence. Supporting proscribed terrorists is a criminal offence. Go figure why the religion of peace is elevated for special treatment by the establishment. And again, that's a cracking example. I mean, the two-tier thing can be used in all sorts of ways, but you are absolutely forced there on the anti-Israel protests that we saw almost on a weekly basis. I'm sure perhaps at a smaller level they are still going on, where the most outrageous things were said and written, very publicly declared. Having a protest is absolutely fine. That's almost part of our DNA in this country. But the idea that you can walk around with some of the racist stuff that was written on these placards and get away with it is just beyond. I mean, there have been arrests, but they seem to do the arrests sort of subsequently, and not that many. I think I'm right in saying. Victor is in Bedfordshire. On the issue of migration, Victor, what are your thoughts? Good afternoon.
Yeah, I don't see the arrival stopping at all.
Okay.
Because like the other week or the other month, it was 800 in a single day.
Yeah.
That was a record, and now it's been broken again by 1,200.
Yeah.
And I think that the only way is to be hard, to be. If you're going to abide by rules and ECHR and so on, and then they'll just keep coming. They need perhaps a task force, SAS-style force, to physically force them back to France and then beyond there.
Which we're told can't happen because of maritime rules and regulations.
You see, well then...
And a diplomatic incident with the French.
If you look at Africa, I was looking at, there's like 54 countries in the African continent.
Mm-hmm.
But they're not all dangerous. And I do wonder whether there's some of these people, someone leaving Eritrea, for example, that's a lot of those migrants are from places like that.
Yep.
Whether they can't just go into a neighbouring African country instead of travelling into Europe.
Well, yeah, I mean, you do wonder that. I mean, that you might think that if you were going to try for something that you felt was a little more democratic or a little bit more free for expression and ambition, that there would be, out of 54 countries, not every, the sort of the urban myth that Africa is this, horrendously poor continent is a massive libel on Africa, frankly. There's a lot of wealth going on, and I know that it's had its issues, and there's development in countries, and some, Nigeria never quite gets it right, South Africa never quite gets it right, etc. But you're right. I just wonder whether, Western life is just a far more attractive way of spending your years than anywhere else. I can only think that. Very few people do it the other way round, and maybe that's the answer. Victor, thank you. Let's go back to Blasphemy. This is Ricky down in London. Ricky, what are your thoughts? Hi.
Western life. Oh, yeah. Western. One thing that you don't hear people mentioning, but these immigrants that are coming over, and it's all interlinked, really, with Islam and blasphemy. Yeah. How many of them are of the Islamic faith? That's another worry. I mean, this is not good at all, either, when you look at it from that aspect. I mean, you say they come over for a Western life, but they want to live in their own cultures, don't they? You mentioned something at the start of your show, Ian. A couple of words that I've had in my brain for ages. Backward medieval. I was in the kitchen and I heard you say this backward medieval. I don't know what you said, culture, religion. Yeah. But that's been something that that's how I refer to it. And
blasphemy laws and the like belong in a kind of medieval culture, not in the 21st century.
I'll tell you something I noticed. I belong to a local Nextdoor app. It's like a community app.
Yeah, I know the one.
And there was an advert. There was an advert for, Eid Mubarak, Eid, this festival. Yep. And so it was a butcher's advert, and he was advertising to order your goat and your lambs now. And the wording was Sharia compliant. And it had all these legal texts about sacrifice and all that. And the comments on the people were saying in the comments, bloody hell, this is really upsetting. Can people get rid of this advert? You know what I mean? Because it was really, we don't talk about, we have a turkey at Christmas, but we don't say we're going to sacrifice a turkey, you know, in honour of Allah and things like that.
Should come round our house.
It was
the whole festival.
It was really upsetting. And that's the way we're heading. Because Julia Hartley-Brewer, she tends to talk about Islamism and Muslims and Islam. There's some kind of separation. But what I want to point out, you know, the Gaza 5 MPs, if there is this separation between the Islamists and the moderate Muslims, how come these Gaza MPs are being voted into Parliament? Because by that reckoning, then, these Gaza MPs will all be voted in by just the Islamists.
When you say the Gaza, what do you mean by Gaza MP?
The Gaza 5 that we call them, don't we? Got through.
I'm not familiar with that. I'm not familiar with that, sir.
Gaza ticket. We call them, but they got through on the Gaza ticket because they said this is for Gaza. You know them ones.
So MPs that use that as a central point of their campaign who got into power. Yeah.
Yeah. So they were voted in.
Yep.
They were voted in by moderate Muslims. They weren't voted in by Islamists. So there is no separation, is there? Can you see what I'm saying?
I can't. Yeah, it's a slightly wonky example, but I see what you're saying. But I do, I come back and listen, Ricky. Thank you, mate. I do come back to that issue of, when people say there's only one type of person in that faith, so there's no differences. And I mean that's clearly nonsense. I always talk about the doctor fella down the road from us, and everyone, will know of somebody or know somebody who knows of somebody who clearly doesn't support, beheadings and 7/7 and 9/11 and all that kind of stuff. I mean, that's really all you have to ask yourself. Mark says, I love these kind of messages. You and Ms. Oakshott, Talk's international correspondent, moan about defence spending. I didn't moan about it at all, by the way. Yet your beloved Tories brought defence spending up to just 2% of GDP. They would rather give people tax cuts instead. Well, they didn't really do that either, did they? Yet you both sit there and condemn Labour. What nonsense is? Labour were left in a disaster of an economy and are trying to put it right. What have reform promised regards defence spending? Probably another few $100 billion in uncosted spending. Could you please be a bit more balanced in your reporting and stop blaming Labour, who have been in power for 10 months, not 14 years? Mark, you've sent that to me like I disagree with you. I mean, I agree with almost every single word that Mark has just said. The Tories were woeful on it. You almost don't need to mention it. It's a given. What we're talking about here with Labour is going forward, not backwards. This is plans for the future. I'm not even condemning. I have no idea what the right amount to spend of GDP is going to be. Most of this, of what is happening in this country and others, is essentially based on Donald Trump's pressure to get countries to up their game when it comes to defence. That's really what it's all about. And I don't think, even if the Liberal Democrats had won the last election, they would also be promising 3.5% or whatever. But make no mistake, yeah, the Tories did naff all in this respect, and I think probably Isabel Oakeshott would echo that as well. 0344 499 1000. Lots to get through coming up in a couple of moments. We will talk more to you. Comments on blasphemy, comments on what the French are not doing. Details to come. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
25 to 3 on Talk. I thought my teeth were going to fall out then for a second. They are my own teeth, by the way. Let's move to this story, because we are talking about blasphemy here, and there's lots of different elements to it, and the Tories are warning of creeping blasphemy laws. This is after a man was fined for burning a Quran outside the Turkish embassy in London. Hamid Koskan also shouted anti-Islamic slurs. He was convicted of a public order offence, but with a religious component to it. Kemi Badenoch said it's putting Britain on the road to ruin, with Robert Jenrick calling it two-tier justice. Both of these people, of course, were in office when this stuff was still going on as well, so they've got hardly any room to talk. David Shipley, former prisoner and prison justice campaigner, now is with us, who often helps us out on these kind of stories. I mean, David, firstly, I think we can all agree we don't really want to be sending people to jail because they burnt a religious book.
I certainly don't, and I'm glad that you don't. I think most right-thinking people in this country don't. But
even the judge in this case didn't want to send him to jail, so there you go.
Oh, no, sure. I mean, I think he's fine. But I think the mere fact of it being a criminal offence to burn a religious book in public and say unpleasant things about that religion is terrifying.
Yeah. But that's where we're at, isn't it? And we were talking with Andrew Doyle, who campaigns and writes and broadcasts a lot about this sort of area of free speech, as I'm sure you're aware, David, a little earlier. And we were saying it's kind of a mission creep thing. It's not as if there's a secret file sitting there in the, you know, some department in the government where they said, right, this is how we need to respond. This is what magistrates and judges need to do. But you are sort of forgiven sometimes for wondering about that. But it just appears that, for want of a better phrase, the establishment have sort of latched on to, I don't know, sort of what people might expect or what they think is the safest option. I've no idea what it is. But I would love this judge to have said, look, you know, you were a bit of an idiot, because setting fire to something in the street is probably not a good look. It's also littering, if nothing else. That, as far as I can see, is the biggest offence, but that's another story. And maybe there was some disorder in what you did, but bringing the religious part into it is the area that I'm particularly uncomfortable with.
Yes, as am I. And I think what I suspect I detect in this is the same thing actually that animates the covering up of the grooming gangs. It's a desire to prioritise community relations, good community relations above all, and not to actually say, well, do you know what, we're a secular liberal democracy, and one of the things that happens in a secular liberal democracy is, yes, your religious beliefs can be insulted, your religious book can be burned, and that's not a crime. And also, you don't get to go and attack the person who's done it. And let's remember what's happened in this case. Hamid Karzai is, when he was doing this burning of a Quran outside the Turkish embassy, he was attacked by two men. One of them has pleaded guilty and is awaiting sentencing. The other has never been caught. And the judge who found Hamid guilty yesterday actually used the fact that he was attacked as evidence that he did stir up severe public disorder. So it's almost victim blaming him. And I think it's completely wrong here. I think Judge John McGarver has got it entirely wrong here.
And again, you know, we see these kind of stories. It does, rightly or wrongly, but, you know, I think we can all say understandably, it does sort of throw up that kind of two-tier question again. I don't normally like going there because it doesn't do well under scrutiny, that phrase, but it does take you there. It does take you into that place.
I think so. And I think if the test is, do people of that religion physically attack you when you're mocking their religion, then I would suggest that, for example, Christians or Buddhists are much less likely to respond with violence in that sort of situation. And therefore, if the test is simply the response of violence, then you are inherently favouring religions whose adherents are more violent. And that also obviously creates a huge incentive for people to respond with violence, because then they know they can get the person arrested.
Well, indeed, and you know, somebody mentioned the kind of Palestinian marches that we've had over the last year or more in this country, and one wonders if that is exactly what the kind of response, the deliberate response has been, or lack of response. I know there's often subsequent arrests where police look back at footage and discover that, you know, or that person was doing something wrong, they were holding clearly an inflammatory sign or whatever, but they don't do it at the time. And I sense it's for the very reason you've just given, that there is a fear that, you know, there may well be two problems. One, you might find people who are sort of very hardcore of that faith responding there and then, but also they've got the police have got the problem of being accused of being racist as well. So you've got all of this happening, and the kind of real victim here is justice.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, I think one of the basic principles of a good society is that justice should be equal, should be blind, should treat offences the same, whoever commits them. Yeah. And it doesn't seem like we have that here. And I think actually with the big protests, one of the issues is what the police don't feel supported, they don't feel able, perhaps they don't feel they have the capacity to challenge those big protests. It's obviously easy enough to arrest one man who's burning a Quran outside the Turkish embassy as a protest. You know, grappling with serious mobs of people threatening violence is a lot harder.
I mean, it's very difficult because we can't say too much about the other case that is still pending, and the food delivery bloke on the bike. In this case, I don't think he's ever been traced, which I would have thought he could be, but I don't think he has. But certainly, you know, you would have to, based on what we've seen, you would imagine that somebody is going to really throw the book at someone else in this entire case.
Yeah, I think the chap who was on the delivery bike has never been caught. The other man has pleaded guilty to assaulting Hamid Karzai, but I understand that's going to come to sentencing, and for another offence that he'll be tried for next month. So I think that's still to come.
Indeed.
But yeah, the sort of the idea that the person who gets attacked violently is a criminal does seem very strange. It doesn't seem to me how a good society should operate.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. David, thank you as ever. David Shipley, former prisoner, prison justice campaigner. A lot of this stuff is just kind of common sense. I do get public order issues. I understand that there is an offence of public order because you could do something that sparks carnage in your high street, whatever it happens to be. And we have, you know, generally speaking, the old bill don't want to arrest you for a public order offence unless they really have to, unless they sense that something's, you know, quite serious could kick off. If as a result of what you are doing, you are going to escalate something, or you're going to take something from nothing and it's going to turn into something rather big, then I understand why we have a civilized system that would want to stop that happening. And if that means an arrest, even if no charges follow, but taking somebody away from the scene because their presence there is clearly going to inflame something that sparks a flipping riot, then yeah, I understand. No one is denying the notion of a public order offence, and you could even push me and say, yeah, this is a guy that was committing a public order offence because he was saying something very vocally and very loud that it was likely that somebody was going to take umbrage to what he said. Now, stupid as that might be, it was likely somebody would. But again, I just come back to that same problem of the religious bit. I mean, why the religious? So what if this man hated Islam? So flipping what if he hated Islam? He can hate whatever the heck he likes. He's allowed to not like a religion. And he's allowed to shout loudly that he doesn't like a religion. Yet he might get into that territory of public disorder. We can deal with that. But the religious side of it, this is antagonising and an affront to just basic sense, basic intelligence, right? Surely. Let's get a call in from Grace down in London. Grace, what are you thinking? Good afternoon to you.
Hi, yeah, many things. I mean, I would concur with you that he should be allowed to hate Islam. As a Christian, I think that we should love our neighbours, even love our enemies. But that's what I believe as a Christian, and no one else is obliged to agree with me about that. That's my conviction, because I choose to follow Jesus, but not everyone is doing that. So ultimately, it's kind of a matter of thoughts and actions. It's very important that people do not carry out hateful actions towards Muslims, and hating Muslims is, I think, wrong and different to hating Islam. And I think there's a real failure to make that distinction in this case. You know, I think I get the impression that he probably has concern about people who have been born into Islam and,
yes.
might not have chosen it.
I would also imagine, by dint of his nationality and the like, he probably has more experience with Muslims on a daily basis than most of us do. So, and I don't imagine they would have all been negative. I think he's talking about, if you follow this faith, then there is something wrong. That's his belief.
Yeah, I mean, I should be clear. I don't think he should have done it. I think that you shouldn't set fire to things in public generally. I think that there's a risk of antagonising some dangerous people when you do things like this. And I think that, again, as a Christian, I think it's good to try to be as kind and compassionate to others as possible. So given that it could unnecessarily offend or upset some people, it probably wasn't the most sensible thing to do. But I also, personally, as a Christian, I think if someone were to burn a Bible, I'd be sad, because to me, as mad as it might sound, I actually think there's good reason, rationally based on science and history, to conclude that Christianity is true. So I'm sad if people want to reject it so much that they want to burn a Bible. But if they do burn a Bible, we can just print more Bibles.
Well, that's also very true. You're not burning the religion. I mean, you can't take that away. And in fact, I said at the beginning, Grace, that most people who follow a faith, and in your case, you are very intrinsically linked to your own faith of Christianity, and that is a guide and a comfort to you, and whatever reasons you have something on those that don't believe that in many ways. You have almost a comfort zone. You have a guidance. You have a beacon that takes you into areas that, can explain things and help you with decisions and blah, blah, blah. So you would be perfectly relaxed if I said to you, Christianity, what a load of old nonsense. You'd look at me and pity me, right? Rather than want to stone me to death.
Yeah, I mean, pity sounds very derogatory. I don't want to sound like I'd be patronising you, but yes, I would feel sad that you or whoever said it were missing out on what I believe is true, and also gives me a lot of joy. And there's no point me feeling angry with you about it. If people are going to be deliberately antagonistic all the time, it can get a bit wearisome, and people are antagonistic about it a lot of the time. But ultimately, no, I'm not angry with them. I just wish that they had the joy that I have, and it's no reason for me to be mad at them. But there are some distinctions. I mean, people sometimes say all religions are all the same, but they're not. In Islam, they do believe that a print of the Quran itself has a kind of sacred, I don't want to say magical because that sounds derogatory, but it has a particular thing that we don't have in the same way.
And an image of the Prophet similarly carries that same kind of spiritual impact.
So there are some differences between the religions, and I think it's good that people generally in British society as a liberal country want to try to avoid offending people. I think that's generally a good thing, but it's really important at the same time that we can talk about ideas that we disagree with, and that we can make distinctions between ideas and people. I mean, and that's a fundamental thing about Christianity, is that we believe that God loves us as well as hating some of the things that we do and think. So, there's a distinction between people and their ideas or actions. We believe that God can love us even though he disagrees with us. And similarly, we need to be able to love people around us, but also sometimes disagree with them.
And it's a great point to finish on. Grace, thank you very much indeed for that. Grace in London. One in from Cliff, who says, I'm a devout Roman Catholic, but I wouldn't get upset and seek revenge if someone destroyed a Bible. That's their choice. People often say that religion should stay out of the law, but many of our laws are based on biblical teachings. Not to steal, not to kill, etc. My observation, as we as a country have turned away from religion, so society has declined. Is that a coincidence? That's a very good point. But wouldn't that be the commonality between, there is... the religious teachings, there is some just common sense stuff in there. Thou shalt not kill, sleep with your neighbour's wife or whatever it is, or steal stuff. I'm pretty sure if you went through every faith, whether you're a Hindu, a Jew, a Muslim, a Christian, you'd probably find something similar in that ballpark. We'd all agree with that. So, yeah, that's fine. And our laws reflect that. But I wonder whether they reflect it because it's religious or because it's just common sense and decency. 0344 499 1000. More from you on the way. Before we go any further, got a brand new Voice of Doom coming in a few moments' time, by the way. And this is an absolute belter. We're giving you the chance to win World Cup tickets. FIFA Club World Cup final tickets. It's as big as it gets, kids. Thanks to our friends at DAZN. Here's everything you need to know.
Hi, it's Jim White here. Here at talkSPORT, we're gearing up for the Club World Cup in the United States. And to celebrate, we've got 2 tickets to the final in New York on July the 13th to give away. We'll sort flights, accommodation, and give you $5,000 spending money to spend however you like. 18 plus, UK excluding Northern Ireland. All you have to do to enter is text the word football to 83338 by the 13th of June at 11 p.m. and you're in the draw. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message. You must have the bill payer's permission or send your name and number by post to Club World Cup Final Prize Draw, P.O. Box 3190, Colchester CO2 8GP, to arrive by 5 p.m. on June the 18th.
This is a talkSPORT limited competition run on talkSPORT Talk and Virgin Radio UK stations. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
Well, it's not getting any better, is it? You know, they haven't listened to any of the unions. They haven't listened to any of the protests we've had, and it's all been peaceful. It's all been sensible, and it's all trying to start a discussion with these people. We're seeing job losses already, you know, in some of these tractor companies. Now, you know, if you're going to tax an industry like this, people are going to slow down on spending, slow down on investing, and
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Don't go away, George, with you in just a second. Let's do a brand new voice of doom. It's the mystery voice with a political edge to it. This could be MP, dead or alive, past or present, any party, or it could be somebody so intrinsically linked to politics that you might just know who they are. We're on a run of people getting this the first time. Our record so far is, I think, 21 days. Well, not 21 consecutive days, by the way. We had about a week off in between or something similar to that. There is a down market radio station somewhere that apparently did a mystery voice for nearly a year. That it went on for. So somebody told us yesterday. So have a listen to this voice. Can you identify who this is?
Just utterly shocking.
Who is that? 87222. Don't phone, but you can message 87222. Here it is again.
Just utterly shocking.
Who do you think that might be? Hopefully we get a correct answer and we reveal all after the news at 3 o'clock. If we don't, it rolls over to tomorrow. Here it is again.
Just utterly shocking.
87222 if you think you know who that is. Back to your calls. George in Dundee. How you doing, George?
I'm doing fine, Ian.
Nice to have you with us. Great to speak. What do you reckon to this blasphemy issue that we're discussing here?
Yeah. It's the irony that's getting to me, Ian. The guy gets arrested, charged and prosecuted for burning a book. Yeah. And there's some on the left, not all, but some on the left are very comfortable with that. The same people want to bring back the lassie begging to this country who has been involved in an organisation, who hasn't burnt books. They have burnt Christians and non-believers in cages.
Yeah.
It is absolutely astonishing. These people, you couldn't mark their necks with a blowtorch. And I'd also like to say, if there is a God, I very much doubt it, but if there is a God, he's all-seeing, so anybody that offends him will be punished in the course of time. We don't need human laws or people slashing at you with knives because you've insulted or offended a so-called mythical being.
I mean, if it was in any other context, we would just find this funny, wouldn't we? We would say, oh, look, you know, if it was a satirical show, oh, look, a man gets upset about a book, so he sets fire to it, and then a mad person starts to attack him with an axe, saying, you can't do that, it's there. You know, it would just be Monty Python-esque.
Well, it reminds me of The Life of Brian, when John Cleese is telling the man he can't say Jehovah.
That's
and
right.
He starts dancing about shouting Jehovah. Yeah. It is the blackest of black humour. And if blasphemy laws are the answer in this country, I really don't want to know what the question is.
Yeah, spot on, George. It's a great call. Love the passion as well, George in Dundee. Remember, we do have MPs currently in Parliament who are kind of happy with all of this. They would like to see very specific blasphemy laws and protections come into this country. That is not what the United Kingdom, most other Western countries for that matter, most democratic countries for that matter, stand for in the 21st century. It's not how we do business. Wherever you happen to be, there will always be situations that test the law, and that's why we have mostly a pretty good legal system. You know, those moments that come along and top lawyers sort of scratch their head and go, well, we've never come across this before. This is interesting. What do we do with this? It falls in this law, but it also slightly falls within that law. potentially. So, yeah, it's interesting. I get that, but this isn't one of the... This is a very simple, kind of straightforward case. As of call him a nutter if you want. You know, you can say, if you want, that the guy that set fire to the Quran is a bit batshit crazy, and maybe he is. He could be a bit mad. He was certainly very angry, and his words were not very kind. And, you know, it's a similar thing with people who write, you know, tripe on social media. They're usually a bit thick, and that isn't a criminal offence, right? They're usually wrong, and that isn't a criminal offence either. Sometimes they might be right, but with perhaps the wrong evidence, or not the kindest way of articulating. You know, we get all of that. But it's not a criminal offence to be wrong and an idiot, or either. I mean, it's fine to be all of those things. But that's the world we're in, and that could get worse with all sorts of communications acts and God knows what going through. And, you know, hurty words should very, 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 if not ever, land you in clink. And we can condemn those words, and sometimes there may well be a penalty if you're doing something or saying something that could have potentially taken something to another level. You know, you know, we're not stupid. We all understand that. But you don't go to jail for that kind of thing. You don't go to jail for 31 months, and certainly not when other people who literally committed acts of violence and sexual assault and worse have not gone to prison for the same length of time. That's just mucked up. 0344 499 1000. Lots to come in the next section. More calls, great calls and comments this afternoon, whether it's on Blasphemy or anything else. And the brand new voice of doom. Is anybody going to get this correct? Here's the voice.
Just utterly shocking.
If you think you know who that is, 87222. Hopefully we get an answer, and we'll tell you after the news at 3 o'clock.
We've just been talking in the office here about how many of us have been attacked at some point or other by some form of flying beast or any wildlife. I mean, so we'll take your stories this morning.
Hello, this story's concerned.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
And good afternoon. Welcome back to the home of common sense. As we've been discussing, the Conservatives, they've got the cheek to complain about backdoor blasphemy laws creeping in. This is after the man who burned the Quran was convicted. Kemi Badenoch saying it set the country on the road to ruin and the case should not go to appeal. This was the same Kemi Badenoch who was part of a government that waved through non-crime hate incidents by the thousands. Details and more comment from you on the way. Do you see this recent case as backdoor blasphemy laws? Thoughts on that? Also this afternoon, police investigating the disappearance of Madeleine McCann are carrying out fresh searches in Portugal this week, 18 years after the 3-year-old went missing. We'll have details on that in a few moments. And Britain should embrace a future of AI doctors and nurses or risk being left behind in the biggest upheaval since the Industrial Revolution, according to, he's back, former Prime Minister Sir Tony Blair. We'll have more on that story as well. Everything you need to know and all the breaking news right here on Talk. 0344 499 1000. Let's do the voice of doom. Have we got a winner? I think this one is doable. Have a listen to the voice.
Just utterly shocking.
Who is that? These are some of the answers we had. Steve Baker, no. Robert Jenrick, it is not. David Willits, no. Mark Francois, no. Keir Starmer, it is not. Stephen Doherty, no. Lord Peter Melchett, it is not. In fact, we haven't got a correct answer. There you go. It rolls over to tomorrow. Can we just hear it again, Sam? Here's the voice.
Just utterly shocking.
Stand by, 2:45 tomorrow afternoon on the programme. Let's move to this story. Now, search teams are scouring plots of land with radar equipment in fresh efforts to find Madeleine McCann 18 years after her disappearance. Now, we know that she vanished on a family holiday in Praia da Luz in 2007. She was just 3 years old. A German national, Christian B., who used to live nearby and is a prime suspect, denies any involvement. In a moment, we'll speak to Veronica Lorraine, head of features at The Sun. She was there in Portugal just a few months after Madeleine McCann went missing, looking at this story. First, Charlie Hedges, missing persons expert, is with us. Charlie, good afternoon to you. Police forces, search teams, to ever sort of look at a story and say, well, this is how we deal with a missing person, because each one is different. There are often some similarities, but a case such as this seems to have eluded investigators and searchers for the best part of 2 decades.
Absolutely, yes. With any of these cases, it's critical to get the first response right and do the early work. I mean, what we're seeing now is sort of very much behind the game searching and making life is very difficult to try for the officers to find anything. But hopefully, this latest drive is backed by solid evidence and to point them towards the right direction and make sure the searches are effective and reveal some outcomes.
Yeah. Do you sense, and you may not be able to comment on this, I don't know, unfairly put you on the spot, Charlie, but do you, when you look back at a case such a high-profile case, and it had, global headlines for weeks, months, and years, but in those initial days, was there anything that struck you as remiss in terms of what wasn't happening, that you would expect to happen in a case like this?
Well, the early stages are absolutely critical. I wasn't on the ground at the time, so it's difficult to be precise, but there's been a lot of issues raised around how the family were considered around this and how the initial response was played out. Statistically, most of these cases are abduction by someone known to the child. Stranger abductions, thankfully, are very, very rare. So the early stages is essential to either rule in or rule out the family and friends to make sure they weren't involved, and then you move on. But you've got to have various hypotheses about what may have happened and to do a thorough search and a thorough interrogation of witnesses and people living in the area to gather the information. If you don't do that, the job just goes on forever.
And I remember, speculation ran wild. It still does. All sorts of theories. Many have led to, legal issues. There's been libel. There's been books written. Goodness me. I mean, the list goes on. I remember the Portuguese police. I'm sure you remember this. Two Charlie, were criticised for not updating enough on the story, but of course the Portuguese said, well, we don't do it like that here, and that's fine. That wasn't their method of policing. They don't give an update every couple of days. They might wait a couple of weeks. I mean, you can only imagine in today's climate the criticism the police get for not updating something within an hour, but that was just their way of policing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we have to recognise that the responses as you travel around the world are very different in other countries. We are quite good here that we're reasonably focused on it, and we do have the media engagement.
Yeah.
I've worked in many different countries around the world, and you see some very, very different responses in different countries and different attitudes to missing people.
Yeah, and I guess, you know, 2 decades down the line, it can... One would assume, unless there is some sort of grim discovery, then it's really only sort of new intelligence that is going to solve this, and that appears to be where the police are at the moment.
One would presume that they've got there's obviously a reason for why they're doing what they're doing. They've got warrants for it, and it's being considerable amount of money to launch this sort of enterprise.
Sure.
So it's got to have been approved at a very high level. So there must be some good grounds for them doing it.
Yeah.
But what they're actually going to find this far on, because any evidence and remains will be degraded considerably. It's not impossible. They could have information there that where they come up with some remnants that are able to link the whole thing together. That's what we hope for, and for the family's sake, we would love it to come to a satisfactory conclusion, or as satisfactory as it can be under the circumstances.
Indeed. Listen, Charlie, thank you for your time. So I really appreciate that. Charlie Hedges, missing persons expert. Let's speak with Veronica Lorraine, Associate Head of Features at The Sun. Afternoon to you, Veronica. Good to see you. I mean, you've been a journalist for a long time. Have you ever known a story that has been so constant in the headlines as this? I mean, clearly it's a distressing story. It involves the disappearance of a child who was just 3 years old back then in 2007, but it's never really left the news agenda fully, has it?
It's incredible, isn't it? I mean, working on a tabloid newspaper, stories about missing children come in every day, and they never normally make the paper because they're found pretty quickly, and this has just gone on and on and on. I mean, I was covering it back in 2007. I went out to Portugal, and it's just astonishing it's still going nearly 20 years later.
And of course it had, not to in any way sort of cheapen the, because clearly this is about parents who've lost their daughter. I mean, in the ultimate sort of distress and horror that any parent could experience. And of course, to compound it, it's not yet solved. They, I think the McCanns, certainly up until recently, still have lived with that hope that, I know Kate McCann has said quite regularly, I think my daughter is, there's no evidence to the contrary, I think has been her line.
Yeah, I think as a parent, you have to have that hope, don't you?
Of course you do.
I mean,
of course you do.
How can you carry on without it?
But of course, what made this stand out, it wasn't, I suppose, and again, our previous guest, we were just saying, there is no sort of template for these things, that they all happen in different ways. When a child goes missing, Jamie Bulger, when he went missing, we know what, the horrors of what then unfolded. But of course, this had other elements to it, didn't it? It had the sort of, the middle-class families out there by the pool having dinner, a child left solo with siblings in a hotel room, although it should be said all the other children were also left in similar circumstances, because the families said, well, we could more or less see roughly what was going on, but it didn't stop the McCanns coming under suspicion. All manner of horrors have been thrown in their direction over this as well.
Yeah, I mean, what was astonishing is that very quickly the whole nation was behind them, and then very quickly it turned. I mean, when we were out in Portugal, the whole of Portugal were completely anti the McCanns. Everybody thought that they'd had some sort of involvement, which must have been hugely distressing for them.
And of course, everyone became an armchair detective. God knows how many documentaries were made on this, how many books were written. There were libel actions, court cases. They were right, then they're wrong. They appealed this, and this isn't it. Or they're sending some dogs into the back of a car to say, oh, they think they found something. We remember all of that. I mean, it was never ending.
Yeah, and it was in the Portuguese newspapers every single day. I mean, I went out in the October after she went missing, and I was out there until the March, April time, and every single day there was a story about them. But also led by Amaral, who was this policeman in charge who immediately had taken against the McCanns and was feeding all this really vitriolic, awful stuff.
What was behind that? Why would that have been? Because
I think he didn't like the fact...
copper, for God's sake.
Yeah, but I don't think he liked the fact that the English police were involved and everybody had an opinion, and also it didn't look good on them because there were so many failings. The moment she went missing, they didn't close the roads, they didn't do any searches, Interpol wasn't told until 24 hours later. You know, they came under a lot of criticism, and I think this was his way of lashing out. And then he wrote a book as well.
And then he wrote a book, and then wasn't he taken to court for something? I can't remember. There were so many different legal ramifications around this.
It just carries on and on.
But he wrote a book, so he made a few quid out of his book. Obviously, the resort where this happened, you know, it's difficult, but sort of understandably, we're thinking, hang on, this is our trade, this is our area. And it's being completely maligned by this story that no one solved. So there was some local resentment about this.
There was a bit of local resentment. I mean, everybody there hoped that she would be found alive and well. But I actually had been to Praia de Luz prior to Maddie going missing on holiday.
Right.
And when I went there then, it was this bustling, incredibly touristy, full of English families with young children. When I went back, understandably, it was just after this little girl had gone missing, but it was peak holiday time. The beaches were deserted, the restaurants were empty.
Wow.
I mean, you wouldn't, if you had two choices of a place where where a girl had gone missing or a place where a girl hadn't gone missing, you'd go there, wouldn't you?
It did have a
It definitely
had a place as well.
Definitely had an effect.
I would imagine that's recovered somewhat.
It has.
Today.
I have been back since, and it is. I mean, it's a lovely place. That's the thing. It's no wonder so many Brits go there on holiday. It's a fantastic place to holiday. I wouldn't say it's completely recovered. Maybe. I think it's still quieter than it ever was.
And there will be tourists that still go to that place and take photos of the apartment. And
I mean, there was Maddie tours. There was coach tours. We saw coach tours of people coming round, stopping outside apartment 5A, everyone getting out, taking pictures, getting back in, going off to the next place.
That's extraordinary.
It was pretty sick.
What do you make of this latest sort of turn of events? I know some of your colleagues from The Sun are literally heading there now as we speak to look at this. There's this German national. This story's been floating around for a couple of years now of this, you know, complete wrong-un, by the way, who's got all sorts of horrendous charges and convictions against him, serving time in prison, due to be released, I think, in September this year. How significant is that to you, as somebody who's covered this story?
Interestingly, when it first came out a couple of years ago, I did think, that's it, that's him. It just made so much sense. He is such a wrong-un. He was in the right place, the wrong place, the right place at the right time. It just seemed to make sense. And he was named out of the blue by the German authorities as well. It was a real surprise. But with his history, it all seems to make sense. And now, you know, you've got 30 equivalent of the FBI out there from Germany using this radar, which I suppose has advanced a lot in the last 18 years. I mean...
do you think that's based on something? We had Dave Wooding in with us a little earlier, and Dave was saying he watched the documentary the Channel 4 and The Sun kind of, you know, work together on this, and Dave was just speculating that whether, you know, there was things within that made him wonder whether, you know, there genuinely is something new that they are investigating, rather than a sort of a random, we've got some new kit so we can try this.
I think there's been, as we understand it, there was a tip-off to the German authorities. When that was, I'm not quite sure, but with new information. And also, the fact is that he's due to be released in September.
Yeah.
When he gets out, he's not going to stick around, is he?
Of course he's not.
They're not going to be able to find him. So if new information comes up, they need to act now. It's a sort of now or never situation.
But we have sort of been, maybe not quite in this territory, but there has been lots of headlines, a new lead, new evidence. You know, this could be the moment.
Yeah, I mean, a lake was searched, a dam was searched 2 years ago, and there's been searches since. But I think this is the sort of last roll of the dice for them.
Do you, the McCanns, you don't tend to see them as often being interviewed any longer, for understandable reasons.
Yeah. They need to get on with their lives, and they've got the twins. You know, Maddie would be 21 now, I think it is.
Yeah.
It's been a long time, and I guess you just don't want to keep getting interviewed about the same things over and over again.
But one would assume that when something as significant as this happens, somebody does go round to their house and have a chat with them and say, look, you know, this is going to happen. Or does that happen independently? I don't know.
I'm sure they're well aware of everything, that's going on.
There is no time scale on these things. They are going to be there for a little while, looking, you know, hoping to uncover some sort of new evidence in some shape or form.
I mean, as I understand it, there's pickaxes and shovels and groundbreaking machinery and everything going on at the moment. They're clearing all the foliage around from an old sort of ruined cottage that was near where Bruckner lived. And they're searching round, they're going to be searching round the Ocean Club apartments, and then there's another area, so there's 3 different zones that they're going to be searching on.
But again, I mean, not the most, in the grander scale, not the most important headline, but I guess locals around there will be thinking, you know, here we go again. This is yet again put us under a really negative spotlight.
Yeah, I'm sure it's the last thing they want. I'm sure it's the last thing anybody wants.
Indeed. Veronica, good to see you. Thank you for coming in. Veronica Lorraine is Associate Head of Features over there at The Sun. Thank you to her. Over to you, 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
Greta's journey as well, it's just so cliched, isn't it? I mean, she's gone from the annoying little truant to you know, lecturing people at the UN about climate, and now she's a pro-Palestinian Gaza flag waver. And it just shows you just how vacuous all of that nonsense is. You know, it's the protest for protest's sake. What does she even actually know about any of this? She's a rent-a-crowd, rent-a-gob, bandwagon jumping, irritating little twerp.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is...
It's kind of interesting that one of the big narratives that came out of the missing, Madeleine McCann going missing, was that big focus on the parents, and the parents left their children in a room on their own. That seemed to be really central. And this can't just be me that thinks this. Certainly I wouldn't do that, not with my kids, so I wouldn't leave them anywhere. But they were in a position where, firstly, they weren't the only family. All the families, was there 3 or 4 different families, they were all staying in adjoining apartments, and they left their children in there, and they were sitting on the other side of the swimming pool, and they could see the front doors of those apartments from where they were sitting, and then every half an hour, 40 minutes, one of them went to check on all the rooms, something of that nature. Now, I didn't think that this was down to some horrendous parenting, and there's two reasons for that. Firstly, when I worked as a kind of summer job after leaving school at Pontins, they used to literally call out, and this is just extraordinary, they used to literally call out on the tannoy system, there's a baby crying in chalet 267 or something. And it would be announced in the ballroom to everybody. There's a baby crying in 267 because security teams used to walk around with a walkie-talkie. If they heard a baby crying, they'd radio it through to the reception. The reception would tell the person with the microphone, and then they would announce it. So not only has somebody left their child literally where you couldn't see, possibly half a mile away on a big holiday centre, but you then announced to 1,000 people that there's a lone baby and identified where it is, or a child. That was completely normal. But since then, having gone on holiday with my own kids, and you get talking to people, overhearing conversations, I've definitely heard on 2 occasions people going, oh, I'm just going to go back to the room to check on the kids. It's like, well, that's a bit weird, isn't it? There's 2 of you here, and you're going back to check in the kids. This is like in a hotel situation rather than a resort. Well, yeah, it might be different parts of the hotel are splintered up in different ways on those kind of, if you're doing a holiday on the Costa, you know what those places look like. They're not alone. It doesn't defend anything. And of course, if anyone could turn back the clock on that, they would be the people that would. They don't need reminding of that. But I just thought it was a slightly disproportionate emphasis that was placed on something that for years, thousands of people had done. And to this day, many continue to do so. I was in a restaurant once where somebody was watching their kid on a camera. Their kid was in a cot, and they had a camera attached to the cot, like just a normal baby monitor thing. And they were in the restaurant eating, watching the baby on the camera. And that I thought was strange. 0344 499 1000. Let's go back to Blasphemy. Robert is in Hertfordshire. Robert, what have you got for us? Afternoon.
Yeah, just before that, you spurred me on about going back to the holiday camps. I'm 72, so when I went on holiday with my mum and dad, it was the IDI days. I mean, proper IDI, nobby knees contests, donkey derbies. But what they used to do then, even because my kids are late 40s, we used to actually tie a white handkerchief on the door handle to telling people walking past the chalet, or whether or not it was, to be quiet. So you're
because there was a baby in there, or a kid.
Well, children. I mean, and then when they were little, we had quite a big family, so we used to take it in. So there'd be about 5 different chalets to watch. So we used to take turns each. But I mean, I think, and nothing ever happened. And I think that's why the Moors murders was so horrific, because it took everybody by surprise.
That's a very good point.
More or less.
Yeah.
So, right.
And there is also, just a final point on that, Robert, there is an interesting statistic that stranger snatching of children, the amount of kids a year that happens to has never changed. It's never increased over the years. We just hear far more about it when it does happen. So there's some odd reassurance in that there's not an epidemic of this going on, and probably you could do that today with kids in chalets and they'd be absolutely fine like they were back in the day, but nobody would do it.
Well, now you've got the technology. I mean, you can leave them if they're, a 5-year-old will have his own telephone for a start off, or
there is that.
They go
just
online.
Text your mum, couldn't they?
Okay, the
Blasphemy.
The subject that's really spurred me on, I didn't think I'd be following up so quick. Blasphemy, okay?
Yes.
Now, I've just looked it up on the English dictionary, and it's all, the word blasphemy is all based around the Christian faith, first of all. Now, okay, let's give you a few examples. For God's sake, Jesus, Mary and Joseph, in God's... Now, people say that all the time, okay? Now, this particular case yesterday, the guy was a Muslim, but he was an ex-Muslim, but he was not a practicing Muslim, okay? Now, I'm going to be very careful where I put this, and I'm not going to mention any particular faith, but if I was to say that a prophet of a faith was at unusual sexual preferences. Let's put it that way. Okay, I should be able to say that as a Christian.
Yep.
Now I'll give you an example. You can go down Hyde Park Corner all the time and watch some of these hate preachers, Muslim hate preachers, slagging off Christianity. It doesn't really offend me, but I shouldn't be able to prosecute them for that. If you start prosecuting, look, they've got Sharia law. Okay, so if a practicing Muslim has blasphemed Muhammad, then let Sharia law deal with it. But they shouldn't be able to deal with me. I mean, where's it stop?
No, they shouldn't. But of course, the problem is, as Grace, our previous caller, said, Rob, that if with the Quran and with images of the Prophet, even though they're just bits of paper, they are still sacred. Anything that has the imagery or the inclusion, even if it's something that's knocked up out of a photocopier, holds some kind of sacred dimension to it. So what I'm saying is the level of devout worship to a faith is in a very different place to other faiths, shall we say.
No, but if the guy who done it, if he's not a practicing Muslim, then it shouldn't make no difference.
It shouldn't. But based on the fact that it does to some of those people, clearly not all, but some of those people, it does matter. It matters whether it was you or whether it was their own uncle. If you somehow attack the Prophet or the faith, then their duty is to attack you in some shape or form.
Okay, so
even if it's through the courts.
If this goes through, if this is passed, which it wouldn't surprise me if it is, it's got to work both ways. So when you've got a lot of Palestinian supporters shouting out "Death to the Jews" and from the rivers to the sea, surely that is an offence.
100%, 100%. I mean, they were great examples of, the establishment or Keir Starmer or Yvette Cooper sit there scratching their head going, what are they talking about two-tier policing? Well, it's that. It might not have been your intention. That's the manifestation. You can't have people carrying swastikas in the street who get a free pass, but the moment something else happens, you decide to come down with the full weight of the law. I mean, that's just... right, that's just surely basic common sense. You're a Christian. Go on, Rob.
No, I'm a Christian. I'm not a born-again Christian, but I accepted Jesus. I probably don't sound like a Christian, but I accepted Jesus as my saviour many years ago. And the thing is, I don't really get offended. I could get offended, but the thing with the extreme Muslims, they just want to I don't want to chip away at Christianity. I just want to completely destroy it. And and already they're chipping away. I think, to be honest with you, they've given too much rope. I
don't think Muslims are trying to chip away at Christianity. I think they're trying to expand Islam, right? Isn't that the role of any religion?
Extremists?
No, not extremists, obviously. That's the role should be the role of nobody. No, to expand your own faith. I mean, I always thought the Jehovah's Witnesses were quite, they're quite clever on this. They knock on your door and say, do you want to become one of us? So now, if you can't spread the word of your own faith by knocking on someone's door, very simple act, might be annoying when you're cooking beans at tea time, but do you know what I mean? That's the way you do it, isn't it?
Listen, we had a little old lady when I was a kid, used to come around. She was a Jehovah's Witness, right? And she used to sell the watchtower. And my mum didn't want to upset her, right? So we just bought her a watchtower. For probably 25 years.
I did, yeah. I used to have a lady who had a Marge Simpson-like wig on her head. And every week, because I spoke to her for 10 minutes, she came back. She was obviously hoping that I was going to tick the final box of acceptance, but never did. And then I did sadly have to resort to pretending I wasn't there. Listen, Robert, I've got to move. Thank you for that. 0344 499 1000. Chris says, what happens when the next burning of the Union Jack? Is this not the hate of our country? Yeah, but is that, again, it's a bit weird why somebody would do that, but would that be a crime? In this case, the judge did say that it wasn't a hate crime. I'm pretty sure there was words to that effect where, oddly, they suggested it wasn't actually, or he suggested that it didn't come down as a hate crime. But, of course, there will be many people who suggest that, by definition, he was being prosecuted in a similar way. But he was essentially told that, you know, you're a guilty man because, and these are the words of the judge, this was Judge McGarver, he said he did not view the case as an attempt to expand blasphemy laws, but he said that the guy was, he said that the guy had burning a religious book, although offensive to some, was not necessarily disorderly, but other factors, including Islamophobic comments made in police interviews, made it so on this occasion. Now that's extraordinary in itself, made in police interviews. So not the crime itself, but the interview about the crime. 0344 499 1000.
Talk across the UK on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Now, 25 to 4. There's hardly a week goes by where at some point you think everything's quiet on a certain story, and who chips into the debate? Tony Blair. He's back, and this time he's talking about AI. He says Britain must embrace AI, certainly in healthcare, or risk falling behind in what he's calling the biggest shake-up since the Industrial Revolution. Well, he's certainly not wrong about that. The former Prime Minister said concerns about artificial intelligence should be outweighed by the benefits, especially in transforming public services and saving time and saving money. If you put it like that, what's not to like? He also suggested AI could streamline government itself, making it faster, smarter and more responsive. Let's speak with Dr. Charlotte Blees, author of Dr. Bot, Why Doctors Can Fail Us and How AI Could Save Lives. Charlotte, good afternoon to you. Nice to have you with us. You know, many of us have seen those kind of documentaries where they've sort of done early experiments with what I suppose could now be sort of called AI, as they're able to pinpoint, I don't know, in neurosurgery as an obvious example, part of the brain that your humans simply cannot do, but a machine with adequate learning can do. I mean, you look at that and say, well, what's not to like?
Absolutely, and patients are increasingly turning to these tools as well. So where we previously used Google and talked about Dr. Google, we're increasingly turning to tools like ChatGPT, so tools that are called generative AI, various chatbots that can talk to us, if you like, in real time to answer our queries. Interestingly, sort of regardless of what Tony Blair is saying, and I'm actually in agreement with what he's arguing. I think that AI, we've seen it starting to come for blue collar workers, and the biggest shock maybe is the white collar workers, that when it comes to the professions, including medicine, that these jobs are going to be increasingly disintermediated. In other words, certain tasks are going to be taken over by AI. Yeah. I wouldn't want to put a timeline on it, but I certainly think that there's going to be, in the years to come, a lot of flux with the medical profession and other, say, white-collar professions, where aspects of the job may be more efficiently and also more effectively undertaken by AI.
Yeah, and I remember speaking to a guy in Silicon Valley maybe 10 or 15 years ago, and he made the not unreasonable point, similar to what you've just said, Charlotte, that when the internet kind of first came out and we began to adopt it, and you could, Google or even Ask Jeeves or whatever you were using back in the day, people said, oh, people will be made redundant, jobs will be, and in fact it had the very opposite effect. It actually created lots of jobs, and that was amazing. He said, and people are now saying this about AI, this is a decade ago, he said, but it won't be the same. In fact, it really won't be a jobs revolution. It will be almost the very opposite.
Yeah, I mean, increasingly economists working in this space are forecasting that the jobs aren't going to come back in the same way. I used to work at Harvard Medical School. I was there for 5 years, and my colleagues were sort of privately in whispers, I was in the medical faculty, said that they wouldn't encourage their own children to enter the medical profession. They would encourage them to do jobs like nurse practitioners. So I think, as I say, there's probably in the decades to come, or almost certainly in the decades to come, going to be a kind of a flux with the professions, but it may be some of these some sort of less high status jobs within the professions, physicians associates, nurse practitioners. So where Tony Blair says that AI is coming for nurses, I'd be less optimistic of that, sort of at least in the medium term, but certainly I think doctors do have more reason to be worried.
Yeah, I was talking to a surgeon not that long ago about this, and he said he's a cancer surgeon and he specialises in a certain area, but he said that just to test the whole kind of AI and the various apps that are out there, he put in a kind of typical set of symptoms that a patient might tell him. My throat's a bit achy, not sleeping that well, my appetite's got blah, blah, blah. But some of it was very specific as well. Certainly I've got a weird pain on the left side of my patella or whatever it was. He said he put it all in there and was sort of both mesmerised and horrified to discover that it came up with exactly the diagnosis he would have given, or certainly the one he would have investigated. Now, that's incredible, right? Because Google doesn't do that. Google will, make you think like, well, God, I better go to hospital. Yeah. But this, he said, was, clearly game-changing.
Yeah, I mean, we're all sort of used to using Google and then sort of descending into this sort of cyberchondria where everything seems to lead to cancer. But with these kinds of tools, what's different is they answer back. You can build up a dialogue, and they sort of remember information, so which makes them easier to use as well. Yeah. And as you say, there've been various studies, very early studies with, for example, ChatGPT. So I mean, this has only been on the go for about 2 years now, but sure. Using these tools to sort of let them sit medical school examinations. But as you're pointing out, increasingly studies are looking at the very words patients will use. And here, it's harder to dismiss the performance of these tools as just, it's one thing sitting a medical school exam. Mind you, that's what we only expect of doctors. So, sure. But when you actually ask these tools to respond to the vernacular that patients use, some of the wording that they use, they still are incredibly impressive tools. Yeah. And in many experiments, conducted, I should say, by doctors who are seeing what's happening within this space, that they are getting to diagnoses faster, more accurately, including for rare diseases. 1 in 10 people has a rare disease. In Europe, patients wait an average of 8 years for a diagnosis. Wow. These tools are able to come up with the diagnostic, correct diagnosis rapidly.
Wow.
So it's really changing things for patients.
Indeed. You just used the term hypochondria. Why have I never heard anybody say that before? That's utterly brilliant.
I can't take credit. It's not my own.
I think you should, Charlotte. Copyright that. You could call the next book that, maybe.
I shouldn't say that, yeah.
But it's so true, because we've all done that with Google. At one point, I thought I had rabies, for goodness sake. You know, it's very easy to find the wrong diagnosis. But as you say, new AI learning does begin to tell a very different story. And I suppose there's then the practical implication, whereby it's not just about, you know, what is wrong with you and how best to treat you, etc., but it's even how you're treated, because machine learning, which goes along with all of this, can also be, and we still have, we already, as you know better than me, we already have some of that going on. I mentioned brain surgery, neurosurgery earlier, which is an area where it's incredibly impressive in what it can do compared to even a decade ago. There's going to be more of that, right?
Yeah, actually I've conducted surveys on this. So in the UK, so I did a survey 2024 where I asked 1,000 UK GPs across the whole of the UK, are you using tools like ChatGPT for any clinical task? 20% said that they were. Yeah. I redid the survey earlier this year. A year later, 25% of GPs said they were using these tools. These are consumer-facing tools that we as patients could be using. So there's something different going on here with these kinds of tools that we haven't seen with other kinds of AI before. And as I say, sort of keep coming back to this, the fact not only are they impressive, but they're easy to use because of that sort of dialogic nature with them. You can have this back and forth with a conversation.
Yeah. But when you get into, I was just going to say, Charlotte, sorry to interject, but when you get into that area of surgery, you know, I love those kind of surgeons beyond the frontier kind of programs where, you know, you will get the voice, very dramatic voiceover usually, but, you know, they will describe that, you know, this surgeon is literally 0.5 millimetre from a very vital part of the anatomy, and, you know, one wrong move and it's curtains for the patient, etc. But I guess you get to a point where that won't happen, because a machine will be so geared up, so intelligence-led, that it will avoid all of that, in theory.
Yeah, I mean, so some people have, and they've been saying for years, AI, doctors who are AI enthusiasts have been saying, you know, there will come a point where we say, I don't want that surgeon touching me. I want the AI to do it. I want the robot to do it. Where there may be this kind of flipping over of a sort of cultural shift between what we find acceptable. Because right now, patients do find it acceptable that their doctor, on the whole, find it acceptable that their doctors use AI tools, but they still want the doctor, human doctor, to be accountable for the decision and make the final decision. But what's really interesting is when you put AI together with doctors, actually it's not a very good team sport. Doctors tend to hurt the accuracy of AI. They don't in other words, they don't use AI as effectively as they could when AI surpasses them. Yeah. So there are big challenges there too.
Indeed. Well, I mean, confronting the, and I don't mean this as a pejorative, but confronting the ego of a senior consultant is, as I'm sure you know, is not always the easiest conversation in the world. So at least they'll be arguing with a machine.
No, well, exactly. And there's a very serious point there, because medicine's incredibly hierarchical, and there's an awful lot of bullying that goes on in medicine that again can lead to most errors. Medical errors, the third leading cause of death. So, you know, there's a very serious case to be made for AI within healthcare. And if you have AI that does not fall foul of some of our worst human peccadillos, that is bullying, getting burnt out, needing sleep, needing to pay, all the things that doctors, in fact, sometimes don't have time to do, or they don't report colleagues who are incompetent. Half of doctors who have witnessed an incompetent colleague don't report them. Why? They're scared of repercussions. AI doesn't have any of these kinds of challenges that human-mediated healthcare does suffer from, unfortunately. So, but of course, it invites other concerns.
Listen, Charlotte, it's been fabulous to have you on. Thank you for your time. Really appreciate that. Dr. Charlotte Blees, author of Dr. Bot, Why Doctors Can Fail Us and How AI Could Save Lives. That is a fascinating, I mean, it's one, as she rightly said there. I mean, Tony Blair says we've got to embrace this stuff. You know, ordinarily with Tony Blair, you might go, I'll ignore it. But I don't think we're not going to embrace this, are we? If it's about saving your life and machine learning that can do stuff that works, certainly initially in corroboration with physical clinicians and medical teams, no one's going to not adopt that, I would have thought. But it does make, you know, when you start to really overthink it, and it's very easy to overthink it, it's also bloody terrifying. There's a little bit of that. Maybe that's just a human reaction. Lots more still to come. Jeremy Carl's going to be here after the news at 4 o'clock. He'll pop in to tell us more about what's going on. Plus, of course, back to your calls as well. And this is very important. We're giving you a chance to win and win big. These are FIFA Club World Cup final tickets. In footballing terms, it don't get any bigger than this. This is all thanks to our friends at DAZN. And here's everything you need to know.
Hello. Look who it is, it's me, Andy Goldstein. And here at talkSPORT, we're gearing up for the Club World Cup in the United States. And to celebrate, we've got 2 tickets to the final in New York on July the 13th to give away. We're going to sort out the flights, we're going to sort out the accommodation, and we're going to give you £5,000 spending money to spend however you want. How about that?
18 plus, UK excluding Northern Ireland. For a chance to win, all you have to do to enter is text the word football to 83338. Do that by the 13th of June at 11 p.m. and that's it, you're done. You're in the draw. A text will cost £2 plus 1 standard network rate message. You must have bill payer's permission. Or you can just send your name and number by post to Club World Cup Final Prize Draw, PO Box 3190, Colchester CO2 8GP, and it must arrive by 5 p.m. on the 18th of June.
This is a TalkSPORT limited competition run on TalkSPORT Talk and Virgin Radio UK stations. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
So yesterday, a man was found guilty of public order offences after he burned a Quran outside the Turkish embassy earlier in the year. And I think it's wrong to use the Public Order Act from 1986 in this way. It's a new thing, and we need to amend the law to make it absolutely clear that there is a right to criticise and protest peacefully and without inciting people against religious beliefs, and in particular Islam, which is where we have these problems emerging.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
We've got time to get some more comments in. This will be Steve in Leeds. How you doing, Steve?
Well, very well, Ian. How are you?
Yeah, very good, thanks. What are your thoughts?
Just a quick one on AI.
Yeah.
I don't understand why people haven't considered the impact on taxation with AI. So in the 80s, a lot of the factory jobs went to robots. So instead of having 1,000 people in the factory, you had 300.
Yep.
The company made no money. People paid less income tax and NI to the government, and the machines worked 24 hours a day and didn't go on strike.
Great point.
If we're now getting AI hitting all these high-income jobs, doctors, solicitors, architects, when they get out of a job, they're paying 40-50% national tax, national insurance. That disappears. I can see the benefit to the company because it's 24 hours a day. Doctors don't go on strike. AI doctors for more pay.
But what about
the government's going to lose a massive amount of revenue in taxation and NI from all these high-paid jobs that disappear.
Do you know
what do we do with those people then?
Do you know what, Steve? I've heard people give estimates of up to sort of 40% of the workforce over the next several decades could disappear just because of this. And that's beyond a crisis, right? I mean, that gets to the stage where you have to completely rethink how a country functions financially.
Yeah, but think about this, Ian, just briefly. That 40%, if 20% of that are higher rate taxpayers, collectively, they probably pay about 40% of the income tax.
That's what I mean, yeah.
Yeah, so suddenly the government has this massive funding gap that nobody's considering. You can't tax AI and make it pay income tax.
No.
So where are they going to get the money from to pay all these very intelligent people to sit at home with no job?
What do you do?
Unless to train them all to be plumbers. I'm a plumber by trade. My father, decades ago, said, do a job a robot can't do, because the day a robot has to clear a toilet, it'll turn around and get the human to do it. I'll be the solicitor.
Yeah.
But that's what you'll end up with, people doing manual jobs that AI is too expensive to do.
Well, there's going to be a situation then, isn't there, based on what looks like the direction of travel, where this isn't just a theory, it becomes a reality. So that's what I was saying about you'd have to find another way that countries function, like universal basic income, this kind of stuff.
Yeah, you'd have to pay people. I mean, you think about it, when the AI cars come in, which they will in the next 10 years, how many hundreds of thousands of taxi drivers are going to be out of a job, and what they're going to do? That's,
there's the obvious example. There's the obvious example: driverless cars. Because you think to yourself, why do we need driverless cars? What's the benefit from a driverless car? What's the benefit from, a drone dropping off your Amazon parcel? Well, I can see why Amazon would say, well, it saves a lot of money on. Look how many of those vans are knocking around on a daily basis, and then all the other delivery companies as well. Listen, it's a great point, Steve. Thank you very much indeed. We have explored a couple of times universal basic income. I think we're probably due, under this current climate, probably due to do another debate on that. It works in different ways, by the way, because there is a sort of political, slightly left-wing belief that universal basic income is a good thing because it just sort of equalises things, and it takes away the ridiculousness of the benefit system. It means that, you've got a better level playing field. I mean, the list goes on. There is a theory around that. But there's another theory that universal basic income works because it's the only thing you will have if 40% of the workforce are out of work. Because I kept thinking, well, not in my job. I mean, in my job, you're always going to need gobs on sticks like us that, have to wang on about stuff on the radio. And then I was on YouTube about...
Wang on? What does that mean? I've never had a wang in my... What is a wang?
Bang, wang. No, but then I saw a YouTube ad about a year ago that said it was the first AI voiceover agency.
I don't understand all this. We are literally toast, aren't we? Very soon. I've still got a suntan. We are. I'm just joking. We are toast very soon. But I think that time can't come soon enough. I think we're boring, predictable, and we've done it far too long. Don't you?
Yeah, and deserve a rest.
I mean, I think more than a rest. Kill us off. just kill all the presenters and just end up with what is it? I thought it was a road when we first started talking about it. I thought it was the A1. I didn't know.
A1, yes. Who was it? Who was the presenter? Was it Kev that said the A1?
Did you say, sorry, did you use the word presenter and Kevin?
Sorry, I do apologise.
Honestly.
He might be listening.
He said, good. He says to me always, well done for doing the job you've done. I'll take it from here. That's what he says at 7 o'clock in a sort of massively condescending way.
I like
how's today been? You like everybody, though, don't you? That's why you have lasted this long. I, on the other hand...
Who do I like?
No, you like everybody. But the real Ian Collins came out that night. So, you know...
Which night?
You know which night.
Oh,
you and I
night.
were out the back with the old cigarette, Iceland. Yes,
don't mention Iceland.
No, don't mention Iceland. We went shopping to Iceland. Listen, I mean, it's still the same stories as yesterday, isn't it, really? Now you read that having said that he's going to spend this money with no commitment, NATO could force him. Why haven't NATO forced a government before now, then?
I mean, they force you?
And also, NATO is known for not spending what it should, because that's one of the arguments that Trump's come up with.
So
what, NATO have suddenly...
He thinks 5% is where it should be at.
Yeah, so. Absolutely. Labour blames the weather for the migrant crossings.
Of course they do.
So today will be a good day, then? Because it's absolutely hissing it down. The BBC want to increase their licence fee. That's an absolute joke. They should be disbanded.
Again.
It's embarrassing, isn't it?
You can't. There is no longer... Do you know, I used to have, all the while... We're similar ages, so all the while... It was Doctor Who, Generation Game, Starsky and Hutch, a bit of Parkinson.
Starkers and Crutch, we used to call it. Starkers and
Parkinson in the evening.
Oh.
I could see... that romantic attachment I had to that era, but there were only 3 channels at the time, and that's how we grew up. However... We're not in that era anymore.
No, we're not.
You can't make those arguments.
Terrestrial television's dead, sadly. I mean, literally, when we started on ITV, there were, 4 channels? That was it. My favourite story of the day, there was a councillor who's been accused of building a £50 million bridge to